A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to session 4, which is on diaspora and identities in India and LAC relations. The session would be chaired by Mr. R. Rajagopalan, former High Commissioner to Guyana and Ambassador to Cuba. Sir.
Thank you, Sudip. Thank you all for turning up after lunch. Normally, the after lunch sessions are thinly attended. But the subject is one of interest. We are running slightly behind schedule, not around 10 minutes. So I'm going to forego my opening remarks, except to give just 2 points about the diaspora. The Indian diaspora today is perhaps the second largest, though I have seen writings which says Indian diaspora is the largest in the world. Technically, there's a problem there, considering some people as the Indian diaspora. We are now talking about 18 million, the number which I have from various sources, out of which can broken up. 31 million. We can broken up into 13 and 18 million. You know, the PIOs and NRIs put together. Out of which in the LAC region, mostly in the Caribbean plus the northern South America, we are talking about a diaspora of 1.25 million, 1.3 million. Around 500,000 in Latin America, which includes Guyana and Suriname, and another 750,000. So it's a large diaspora. Here I would like to make a difference between the various types of Indian diaspora. I've had the privilege of serving in at least 3 types of diaspora. We have one diaspora, the oldest I found was when I was in Mauritius. 280 years ago they moved from Pondicherry. The French took them, artisans, settled back. Then the second wave of 175, 180 years ago, those who went to the Caribbean, to Mauritius, essentially indentured labor. Then you have the post-1960, 1970 movement in a big way to Europe, to North America. And then you have the Gulf, which I call 11 months plus 1 month holiday type of a diaspora, who keeps falling back every 11 months back home. So you've got 3 or 4 types of the diaspora. Here today we are concerned with the diaspora in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have 3 speakers. The way India dealt with its diaspora historically there has been a visible shift in the way we look at the diaspora. I will leave it at that. Today we look at I got a phrase from one of the official documents which says, sustained engagement with the forgotten sons and daughters of India. Now that has a lot of story to sell. The forgotten son and daughter, sustained engagement, sustained dialogue. To nurture and help their moorings is the word which has been used. Again, this is another document which I got, and also to harness their energy towards efforts and help them in participating in the new India's story. And the present government, of course, has been looking at the diaspora totally differently than what it was earlier, which includes what was started in early part of the century of the PIO status, which has been converted into the overseas Indian citizenship status, which is not a citizenship because we do not believe in the dual citizenship, but giving them all the rights of a citizen, the diaspora, which has really transformed this relationship, what the diaspora can do. Also, the Indian diaspora everywhere has come to a stage where they are in the not only the opinion forming strata, but they're also in the, in the higher echelons in most of these countries. The most notable is the United States, where the Indian diaspora is now at heights where they can make a difference. With that, I'm going to, we have three speakers with us, and the first one I'm going to call upon Dr. Mahapatra, who is the chairperson who specializes in studies about the diaspora from the Central University of Gujarat. Based on the time available, should we say 15 minutes each, stretchable to 20, so that we have time for a question and answer session also, because the next session, we don't want them to push us out. So 15 minutes, stretchable to another 2-3 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Respected Chair, Ambassador Rajagopalan, my two panelists, who is also my emeritus friend, Dr. Priti and Dr. Abdul Ghaffar and Madam Nutan. At the outset, I would like to thank ICWA for giving me this opportunity and to speak something about the diaspora, because this is a small region I'm going to talk about. Although it is diaspora and identities in the LAC region, I will only confined to only C region, that is the Caribbean region. Again, to make it very confined to these three countries where the diasporic Indian diasporic large concentration is there, and focus upon the two points. One is the cultural preservance and the change of Indian diaspora in the Caribbean, and second is India's interaction and engagement with the Indian diaspora during the pre-independence and post-independence era, and diaspora's response in the region. And finally, I will leave some concluding remarks as well in the form of suggestions and also some strategies also which we can bring or which we can put forward. To begin with, as far as the diaspora is concerned, for the Indian diaspora, often it is referred as the banyan tree. Like banyan tree, Indian diaspora has spread its root, as Sir has also pointed out, to the different corners of the world, in the Europe, in Asia, Africa, and also Caribbean, every region. Despite the harsh conditions in the Caribbean, Indians created a sustenance and success for themselves through their struggle and hard work. And the banyan tree has changed in response to its different environment. Colonialism was a disruptive force in the Caribbean that shaped and reshaped the Caribbean imaginary. The indigenous people of the region were not only physically disseminated, but by the colonial masters, but also colonial masters made all efforts to wipe out their cultural traces from the Caribbean socio-cultural landscape and the Caribbean imaginary. That way, colonialism was a disruptive force that brought people from many countries to the Caribbean, not only from India but also from other countries, particularly from other areas, particularly Africans as well. The arrivals of Indians in the Caribbean not only brought about a demographic change in the physical space of the Caribbean, but also it brought about a change in the Caribbean cultural geography. Caribbean, in the course of its history, become the mosaic for the interplay of many cultures. The presence of many communities of the people in the Caribbean was an accident as well as a rupture in the course of Caribbean demographic, socioculture, economic and political geography. Every community in its own way contributed to the diversity of the Caribbean, and every community had a history to tell, and every community knew its place in the hierarchy of the Caribbean. Now, how this indentured, because all of us know that, as he referred, Sir has referred, that indentured labor was the main cause where this Indian diaspora concentration emerged in the Caribbean region. The abolition of African slavery in the Caribbean in 1833 necessitated for the transportation of labor force from India under the indentureship. This indentureship was a contract signed by the laborer that he or she has to work for a period of 5 years, and subsequently it is his choice whether he goes back to his homeland or renew the contract. As a result, Sila Ramprasad states that between 1845 to 1917, around 5 lakhs Indians were brought to Caribbeans, and due to their hard work, Indians gradually climbed the social, economic and political leader of the Caribbean. This is the small history, brief history, which I just wanted to refer about the Indian presence in the Caribbean. Now, talking about the cultural change and the cultural identity and how the Indians have preserved their cultural identity in the among the diaspora in the Caribbean region, particularly in these three countries, Guyana, Trinidad Tobago and Suriname. For the Indo-Caribbeans, the space of ships in which Indians were sent to the sugar colonies of the Caribbean and the experiences of the passages are important elements in the social imaginary of these diasporic people. The production and reproduction of diaspora culture begins with the ship's passage. That means during the passage itself they have started their negotiating, renegotiating and coming together and maintaining a one culture, that is the Indianness, apart from their caste, religion and places. Similarly, a germination of socialization in the beginning of the lives of Indian immigrants was to be marked in the depots, the sea coast in India, where the indentured laborers were kept before boarding the ship. It is in the depot where for the first time they met and shared spaces with people who are not from their religion, caste, region and linguistic background. In this connection, we may refer to Paul Gilroy's metaphor root and root. One root is of course the origin and another root is the way. When he refers to root metaphor, he speaks of pure uncontaminated homeland to which the first generation Indian immigrants dreamt of returning. That is the root, from they had originated. And about the root, on the way, Vijay Mishra in his book, he talks about the root metaphor in two geographical spaces. One is ship and another is plantation barrack. Ship itself he talks about because on the way they had come too close to each other, and secondly the plantation barracks where they were put in a segregated way, in a very isolated manner. So thus Vijay Mishra says that the ship is the first of the cultural units in which social relations are renegotiated. On the day of boarding ship, the indentured laborer took bath and deep in the river Hooghly, which is a subsidiary of the sacred river Ganges. They threw their belongings to the river and prayed the Ganga Maya that we will come back and collect back our belongings, because they were not permissible, they were not permitted when they are boarded the ship. They have to look alike. Hence, they were given only a shorts and a striped shirts, and with that they have to start the voyage for merely 1 month, 2 months, whatever the period is. In the absence of any real kinship of the family bonds, they instituted a bond of brotherhood known as Jahaji or Jahaji Bhai, which is called as ship brotherhood, among the individuals who had befriended each other during the long voyages. The Jahajis often got themselves assigned to the same plantation and same barracks, regarded each other as the real brothers, and treated each other's children as close kin. Even marriage among the children of the Jahaji Bhais was considered incestuous. They were not allowed to they are not given permission to marry among the Jahaji brotherhood, Jahaji Bhais, the brotherhood. So now, in the beginning, Indians were living in an enclaved world without much or any kind of interaction with outside world for the fear of Africans who had hostility towards Indians as well as the fear of conversion. Brinsley Summer, one of the scholars from Trinidad and Tobago, uses one proverbial symbol of bamboo. He said, when the wind comes, the bamboo may bend but not break. Like that, Indian was prepared to bend but not break. And once the storm had blown away, the bamboo rose majestically once more. And this is how they have tried to preserve their culture, try to retain their culture. One important thing which I want to mention here is how the cultural practices, we have been talking about the cultural practices and the culture, but at the same time I would also mention here how cultural practices of Indian economic activities have helped the Indian diaspora to attain their political and economic positions and made them a distinct identity in their respective region. There is a economic aspect of the culture which perhaps we everyday practice but perhaps we don't notice. One example is, in a normal Indian practice, what do we do? So we earn some money and we just save some money for the future requirement or the future anything requirement for the future expenditure, and through the piggy bank or through some other modalities. But on the contrary, their counterpart, like the Africans, they earn money and they spend money. As a result, when the second and third generation of the Indians they encounter with the Africans, they have started asking money, borrowing money from them. Secondly, by the third generation and fourth generation of the Indian diaspora, some of them by the saving of their money, they have started some retail traders, and they have started some buying some plantations, small plantations, and also accumulated various entrepreneur skill. And I think this is the beginning of their economic progress, whereby they had put in their hard effort. Now coming to the cultural change of the Indian diaspora and the need of diaspora reach. Thereby one can find out why they reach out of the diaspora, why we need to reach out to the diaspora. Because there is a continuous change, as Sir has referred just before a while. There is a comparison between the Mauritian diaspora, Indian diaspora, and also in the Caribbean. Of course there is, sir, I do admit. And Indians themselves were often unaware that they have adopted some of the norms of the Caribbean society. Even then, they were conscious that their culture was changing. They seldom recognized change as an adaptation to the wider Caribbean world. We as Nepal, in an area of darkness states, we are steadily adapting to the food styles of others, and everything we adopted become our own. The outside was still to be dated. Similarly, there is a change can be also seen, which is described by Brinsley Samaru. He uses the term prescindus to refer to the converted Hindus who are the point of interaction between the Christian and the Hindu world. After landing in those distant lands, Indians created a sort of mini India with their carried religious scriptures and socio-cultural practices, which give them sustenance of living in an alien and difficult land. However, in spite of such attempts by the Indian community to preserve their religion and cultural intact, the Christian religious missionaries penetrated into the religious and cultural spheres of the Indians, creating the Presbyterians. Presbyterians were the form of Hindus who lived in both the Indian and the Presbyterian space. These people kept one foot in the planted in the Western Christian world, and another foot planted in their Oriental ancestral place. The Christian religious missionaries mostly preferred the Brahmin converts to preach among the Hindu group. The preference of the Brahmin converts was for the fact that Brahmins was taking the lead among the Hindus in the Indian diaspora concentration. During the 1860s, a Bengali Brahmin was invited from the India to convert the Indians. Same thing also we can notice. There was also a Scottish pastor who changed his name to Garib Das, meaning the servant of the poor, and donned a dhoti and kurta and ate only vegetarian food only to infiltrate Indian Hindus for conversion. Hindu names were given to the converts, but these names had Christian connotations like Yushudas, Yushu Prasad, and Indian musical instruments like dantals and dholaks, harmoniums are also used for the Christian worshipping. The Indian converts were given a Christian first name, but they were allowed to keep their surname. So what we have seen, Rosalind become Rosalind, and Gayadin Maharaj becomes Wilfred Michaelo Gayadin. These are the changes I am talking about because I am referring to changes. The another important changes with which we have seen the term of creolization. This is the term Creole in the Caribbean context emphasizes the essentially alien quality that characterizes such of the Caribbean life. A word of Spanish origin, it originally denoted African slaves born in New World as a distinct from the African born, and soon it came to refer to anyone black or white born in the Caribbean. Then everything, habits, values, essence, ideas, plants grown, goods manufactured, and opinion expressed were all looked at and interpreted in terms of Creole in the Caribbean. In the gradual process, the Creolization process started involving the Indians as well. However, two kinds of attitudes are being marked among the Indians. Some Indians exhibited no problem in adopting Creole behavior and practices, but some other Indians started derogating Creole-like behavior. Similarly, this is the change as far as the language is concerned, and similarly, there is a change also I've seen in the syncretism. At the first level, this syncretic norm is marked in the influence of Hinduism and Islam on each other, and at the second level, the adaptation of Christian ethos in Hindu practices. To get rid of the evil spirits, This is very important, interesting, how they were coexisting and compromising and negotiating in those days in a different and a foreign landscape. This is very important to know. To get rid of the evil spirits, Hindus visited the Islamic priests, Maulavis. Hindus, along with the Muslims, wore tabiz, usually comprising the verses from the Quran, as an armlet of wardening off evil spirits. And Muslims, on the other hand, during their bad days, visited Hindu priests for fortune telling. Munshi Rahman Khan, a Muslim indentured labor, read the Hindu holy scripture, Ramayana, to the Hindu audiences. Syncretism was also marked in the Christian as well as Hindu religious practices and norms. Jesus Christ was equated to Brahma and Krishna by Hindus, and Hanuman was seen at par with Saint Michael, as well as Ogun, the Sango god of war. The most outstanding example of syncretism in Trinidad is the Siparu Mai, the Black Madonna, which is referred as Black Madonna, and the La Divine pastor of the Catholic Church of Siparia was worshipped by Creoles, Venezuelans, as well as by Hindus, who identified her with the Hindu goddess Kali. Similarly, the Hindu place of worship was named a church. The Christian pattern of setting in congregation on wood benches and the Sunday services in Hindu temples were visible and marks of Christian. This is the kind of marks of Christianization of Hinduism. Some other, there was the carnival, which is a very common festival, and that was celebrated by every community. Festivals like the Diwali, Holi, Eid al-Fitr, Christmas, and all festivals, they used to celebrate together. And one important thing, which if I see the chutney music is the Bhojpuri local songs, folklores, which is normally sung and used in the pre-bridal songs, pre-bridal ceremony and the bridal ceremony. And this was a mix of Creole. That Creole words also in the mix. Aage aage nani chale, piche piche nana, uske baad Creole aa jata hai. So this is a continuous form we have seen there. Now, talking about the pre-independence engagement. I have largely focused on the till the period of 1920s. Just another 5 minutes. The pre-independence engagement is largely, this is India's pre-engagement is largely by the Gokhale, Tilak and Gandhi, who has been protesting about the abolition of indentureship, and finally it got abolished in 1920. Similarly, from the Caribbean countries also, there are some revolutionary leaders who had supported the cause of Indian freedom struggle. Prominent among them was Adrina Kola Renji from the Trinidad and Tobago, who was during a study in London in 1942 when Gandhiji had visited for the Roundtable conference. He had made an arrangement and assembled a couple of Indian origin students and met with Gandhi and extended support for the freedom struggle. Similarly, there are some religious missionaries in the Caribbean also. Since the time is very less, I'll just focus on the two prominent missionaries activities which is in the pre-independence, like from 1920 onward, like Hindu missionaries led by Parmanand and followed by the Arya Samajis in the region, and also there are some Arya Sanatan Dharmi, Sanatan Vedic school movement, because the time, so I'll skip it reading this. Then also some Islamic religious missionaries in the Caribbean. Prominent among them is Saha Muhammad Hassan and Fazal Karim Khan Durrani, Amir Ali. These are the missionaries from the Christian as well as Hindu, just to propagate the religion and religious practices in the Caribbean region. In the post-independence engagement, which we'll be talking about largely by these two panelists also, but I will refer to the first in the post-independence engagement from India and the Caribbean. India had India's first visit by late Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi in 1968. Subsequently, India Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, Bajpayee, Manmohan Singh, they had also visited. Recently, Kamala Prasad Visheshwar, she was visited in 2012 and was awarded with a prestigious Pravasi Sanman award. Yeah. Now, there is ample evidences of the programs which are Government of India taking up in the post-independence period, particularly know-how program, tracing the roots and giving scholarship and there are some many initiatives Government of India taking for the cultural aspect. So as I have been indicated that I have to point up. So now coming straight away to my suggestion, what I think it is to be, like it was also discussed in the last panel, so yoga and all that has been tremendously, that is rigorously there. You see in every country there is a yoga center and all. But I still believe, instead of open up the yoga center, why can't we train the trainers in the particular region, particularly in the Caribbean region? Because I think these are the countries, these three countries are important because they are the gateway to the Latin America as well as the Caribbeans. Through this, the gateway because we have a large amount of concentration there, Indian diaspora, and we can make use of these three Indian diasporic large community to enroll to other diaspora communities, Caribbean community countries as well as Latin American countries also. So as far as the suggestion, I think screening of Bollywood movies in and across the Caribbean and Latin America, and giving the Bollywood movie a suiting locales, because as you know, all of us know the Caribbean is a beautiful landscape whereby there is a scenic beauty in this, and this is a very important that can be used for the Bollywood movies as far as shooting locals are concerned, and showcase the periodic exhibition of Indian textile garments, particularly the Indian ethnic garments and the accessories products, and as well as Ayurvedic products in different countries particularly, and that can be rooted, sir, what my point of argument is, that can be rooted instead of India directly open, that can be rooted through these three countries. And initiative can also be taken like tracing the roots, which has emphasis, as ambassador from the Guyana, he was talking about it should be expanded to other countries as well, not confining to the diasporic country. This is a welcome gesture, and I do agree with this, because the tracing the root and the No India program, tracing the root could be very less, but No India program can be extended to other countries as well. Similarly, as far as education is concerned, this is a major concern also in more fellowship to the children of the PIO to study Indian culture in the Indian university. That is the important factor. And the transnational networks among the different cultural organizations of diaspora, it is a very important thing, important issue to be addressed. And of course, discount and provide logistic support to visit Indian pilgrimages. Suppose some Indian diaspora, they are concentrating on other parts, so they can be given some discount and also some logistic support to visit Indian pilgrimages. MOU among the university and opening up the center of the study of Caribbean in the Indian universities can also. And to inform you, all of you, that we have already started the process and got the approval that we have established a Mauritian chair in my university, and recently we have also proposed about the center chair for the Caribbeans, and each after 2 years, particularly from Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana and Suriname, one professor will be coming for this chair. So these are certain initiatives which can take, and I think time and again I have been sir is indicating. So can I go for 1 more minute or wind up?
Make it quarter minute. Half a minute.
Okay. So this is how, to conclude this point is the cultural preservations which they had indulged and which they have been practicing since the Indian child labor in the diasporic countries of Trinidad, Tobago and Guyana, and these three countries, still they have been continuing with it. There are some changes, of course, there are some changes taking place because of job opportunities, because of educational facilities, and when they are exposed to the outer world, gradually this is the change was bound to happen. So the change is also taking place. Now as far as the pre-engagement, post-engagement is concerned, what we have been doing, the Government of India doing for the diasporic countries, the diasporic people there in Caribbean, that can be analyzed, and through these suggestions are made. Thank you so much, sir. I'm sorry for the taking more.
No, my apologies for hastening up, because after lunch sessions are always difficult. I don't want these people to run away. I'm going to hold them here. We've got an important session coming up, the next one. But thank you for covering the basics of the Indian diaspora in this region. Our next speaker is Professor Preeti Singh, who is the chairperson of the Center for Canadian, US, and Latin American Studies at the JNU. she is going from the abstract I have in front of me. She's going to take this a little ahead in terms of looking for an Indo-Caribbean transnational identity and also linking it to the Caribbean diaspora and the Indian diaspora in third countries. I think now, Preeti, you have your 15 minutes, and thereafter, when I stop you, I'll give you your half minute also.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think in order to stop whenever you ask me to stop, let me start with my suggestion. And, my suggestion is precisely this, that we should be engaging the transnational Caribbean communities which have moved away from the Caribbean and into the US, basically into North America. But before I do that, I mean, while I'm talking about that, I'm going to be explaining as to why and how it has happened. So I'll be basically highlighting the changing definitions and nuances of Indo-Caribbean diasporic identity in a globalizing world and the emergence of a transnational identity. And then I'm going to go on to discuss the challenges that it has been posing to the Indian government's policies on diaspora. So I think Dr. Mahapatra has made my task a lot easier by giving you the details. So let me very quickly start defining the Indo-Caribbean identity. I think all of you are very familiar with the term diaspora and the fact that it derived from the Greek term diasporine, which means to scatter. So this is one of the components of the Indo-Caribbean identity, as I'm arguing. To scatter or to be dispersed, not just be moving from one country to another. So what it actually implies is that there is always a desire to maintain links with your homeland, with retention of collective memories, and even if it be myths of the homeland. The second aspect of this Indo-Caribbean identity has been defined by scholars as those who have at some time in the past come from all the countries of the Indian subcontinent, but without an emphasis on forced expulsion, as against, let's say, the Jewish or the black diasporas. However, this definition has been challenged by others who argue that the Indo-Caribbean diaspora suggests a more nuanced view of voluntary versus coerced. That is, it calls into question the notion of free labor or free choice. This modification to the Indo-Caribbean identity is based on a distinction between diaspora and migration. That is, about interpreting one's culture as being marked for all time by the experience of being uprooted. In other words, what they are essentially saying is that it has been a very traumatic experience for them, and we should not forget that while we are defining this Indo-Caribbean identity. Many scholars refer to it as the Coolie Odyssey, right? The third aspect of this definition suggests, therefore, and I'm drawing from this, it suggests a focus on marginalized diasporas. That is, a diaspora that the homeland has long disowned, disavowed. And I've read recent articles of Caribbean scholars who talk about how the Indian government has stripped them of their identity by denying them a dual citizenship and all that debate that has gone on. The next point in this Indo-Caribbean identity is what shapes, therefore, this identity, not just history and geography, which we have been talking about, but also importantly, imagination, which includes religion, language, culture, along with globalization that we'll be talking about. So identity is importantly a perception of one's self, and it's formed on the basis of interaction and understanding of others. So for example, here I can quote Rhoda Reddock, who's an Afro-Trinidadian feminist scholar, who points out that both the Afro-Caribbeans and the Indo-Caribbeans were defined in opposition to each other. So that is something, again, that we need to keep in mind. And she says, and I quote, "It was impossible to know myself if I did not know my other." So that's how the identity formation was taking place. And a fifth, and the most important according to me, a definition of the roots. You were talking about the roots, ROOTS, and also the roots as in routes, ROUTES, So the routes that people traverse add a new dimension to this identity because it takes cognizance of culture as mobility, communication, and action. In other words, it's very different from the old anthropological view of culture being simply tradition. Culture is changing. With globalization, theories on diaspora are now moving away, therefore, from a simplistic emphasis of marginalized diaspora with links to the homeland to a diasporic identities as a process. So it's a process as a result of transnational relationship. In other words, transnationalism is being described as a process of forging and maintaining relationships across borders. And therefore, it engages the concept of an Indo-Caribbean diasporic identity, in which one has to take into account the transnational movements and the difficulties of being a Caribbean diaspora. Right? So very quickly, what are the various phases or the various types of identity that the Indo-Caribbean diaspora has seen? The local identity. This, of course, my good friend has just pointed out that it was a very diverse community that had moved into the Caribbean region, drawn from very different regions in India, north, south, and so very different languages, caste, religion, occupations, etc. So developing a common identity should have been very difficult for the Indo-Caribbeans. But it had started materializing by the early 20th century once the small villages started coming up and gave rise to cultural practices and so on and so forth. And in this, the most dynamic of these, of course, have been the Guyanese, the Trinidadians, and the Surinamese. Unlike the other populations that became assimilated, in the other Caribbean islands. What was common in this diversity was a unified resistance to domination, to westernization, to creolization, which has already been described, so I don't have to go into that, and to Christianity. So struggle became a common factor as an identity. Also resulted in them sort of clinging on to a transplanted culture, leading of persistence in certain norms. And that has also been defined by Morton Klaas as the cultural persistence theory. So despite the creolization of identity, again, which has already been described, Indo-Caribbeans did retain a lot of their Indian characteristics and institutions relative to the other communities that were there. Which also led to, in fact, the development of another identity that I call the national identity. So with settlement becoming more and more permanent, this national identity evolved, which was born in congruence between the belief of a community and those of the state. So the Indo-Caribbean peoples, which belonging to separate ethnic groups within the locality, sharing some cultural characteristics with their ancestral homes, and even those of certain characteristics with the Creole Caribbean community, because certain creolization did take place, had allegiance not only to their nation, but also their ethnicity. For example, there were different value systems that evolved in each nation. Indian languages are being revived in Trinidad and Suriname, not so much in Guyana. So each nation has its own characteristics. But what I'm really trying to stress out here is the ethno-national identity of the Indo-Caribbeans, which did not have to remain specific to any nation or to any region to express themselves as being ethno-national. In fact, I would like to stress that here they were close to the Indian culture, but not so much to India now. So that identity has been changing. And in fact, the Indians had rejected the melting pot, or what is known as the Callaloo model of national identity. Instead, they preferred the tossed salad identity because they wanted to retain this kind of their Indianness. So this ethno-national identity has expanded further. India became the other. Trinidad and Guyana, maybe Suriname, became the home. This transnational imagination has played a pivotal role in connecting diaspora communities with their homeland. There is a trans-Caribbean identity that occurs outside the Caribbean. In fact, Indo-Caribbeans have embraced their West Indian identity now, which they were strongly opposed to while they were in their homeland, that is while they were in the Caribbean. So even more now they are starting to embrace it outside the Caribbean. And this is constructed from memories of assigned Caribbean values, ecology, history, but importantly also ethnicity. So they are tracing back their Indian identity as well. And this Caribbean diaspora that I'm talking about, which has moved out of the Caribbean, mostly in North America, believes that it is important to retain. There's a retention process that takes place in this, because soon over half of the Caribbean diaspora anyway is going to be born in a non-Caribbean country now. Through globalization, transportation, communication technologies, etc., it's much more easy now to settle in a foreign country and retain a connection with one's homeland. So against this backdrop, some scholars have argued that immigrants now satisfy some of the diasporic characteristics. So there is a sort of a closing of the gap between an immigrant and a diaspora, because it's so easy now to easy to reconnect back home. So this impact of globalization had also led scholars to reconsider the diasporic frameworks and expand the definition and the scope of diaspora. Let me stop here with this part of the presentation and move on very, very briefly to India's diasporic policy. And I'm talking about from 1990s, which is when it became important with economic liberalization. The discourse on the Indian diaspora started changing. It acquired a lot of salience among policymakers. In fact, they were no longer being treated as brain drain. They were being labeled as brain banks now. There are subtle distinctions, of course, that are made between NRIs, that were being this was a debate, non-resident Indians and the people of Indian origin. Government of India, it was said, this was within the debate, that Government of India was disposed to extend dual citizenship to the NRIs, not to the PIOs. Of course, the NRIs were from the more developed countries, Australia, UK, US, New Zealand, Canada, etc. And this was being considered as unjust. Right? Anyway, the PIOs have now been merged with OCI, the Overseas Citizens of India, in 2015. In September 2000, Government of India had also set up what was called a high-level committee on Indian diaspora, in short known as the Singhvi Committee Report of 2001, that defined diaspora as a generic term for people who migrated from territories that are currently within the borders of the Republic of India and have retained their emotional, cultural and spiritual links with the country of their origin. Emotional, cultural, spiritual. Now, by so defining Indian diaspora, the government's perspective was seen as somewhat narrow, because that by stating that Indian diaspora comprises only those who have retained their emotional, cultural, spiritual links with the mother country, which is India, it excludes implicitly those Indian communities that desire to reconnect with their native place in India, which may no longer be home, actually. So it's argued that the diaspora concept, with its emphasis on rootedness, reproduction of Indian culture abroad, really cannot help us understand them. There are instances of Caribbean Indians who have settled 2 centuries ago, if I'm right, or another example can be of Indians or Surinamese Indians living, let's say, in the Netherlands, who seldom evince emotional, cultural or spiritual links with India. They are going to be looking only to the Indians of Suriname. So what really needs to be underlined here is that this process of retaining links, as envisioned by the government, was not a natural process. People in diaspora choose to reconnect. They choose what to reconnect with and what not. In some cases, they may choose not to reconnect at all, but still be Indian. Right? Of course, there are a lot of new government programs that have been implemented, and I'll simply mention it and I'll stop there. The Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, I don't think I need to elaborate on that, which is held annually every year. We were talking earlier of the KIP, the Know India program, which invites Indian diaspora, especially the youth, to deepen their understanding of India, and gives preference to the Girmitia countries, again something that a suggestion has been made that needs to be expanded. In fact, this was one of the criticisms of the Indian government, that they are not taking the Caribbean diaspora seriously enough. And therefore, in 2017, Prime Minister at the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas had recognized the special bond that India has with the Indian diaspora living in Girmitia countries and the difficulties that they had faced in obtaining an OCI card, and because it was restricted to, I think, the 4th generation Indian. And so now the OCI scheme, he said, would be made easier for these countries. So in conclusion, all I'm going to say is that these transnational ethnic bonds that the diaspora groups hold have to be re-evaluated as they provide a new understanding of diaspora. Any analysis of identity and rights of the diaspora needs to transcend the theoretical constructs of which they were made in the past. There has to be a shift in the focus from looking at the immigrants' acculturation as governed by integration to a more process-oriented notion of acculturation, because identities are process-oriented, they do keep changing, and to think in terms of moving cultures and identities of the diaspora from here and there, past and present, homeland and hostland, self and other, because they are constantly being renegotiated. Thank you.
Thank you. Your presentation did take the debate a step ahead, and we have our last speaker for this session, Dr. Abdul Ghaffar. It has been nicely arranged because you are taking this debate one more step ahead as to how the diaspora can take part in the Indian story. He talks about introducing initiatives to attract capital and skills of the Indian diaspora in the Indian success story. You have your 15 minutes.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, ICWA, for giving me this opportunity. As sir and madam has already talked about the diaspora thing in this Caribbean region, almost the part of the presentation has been taken up actually. So I will talk very precisely where the topics which they have left actually. Indian diaspora in this region, the Latin America and Caribbean region, consists of two groups actually. Before speaking that one, the thing is that my presentations will be focused on four broad themes. One is Indian diaspora in the Caribbean, and second is India's engagement with the Caribbean in the region, and third part will be the responses of the diaspora to the India's initiative, and the fourth will be the conclusion, or we can say the suggestions part. The Indian diaspora in the regions consists of two ways. First is the small group of Indians who came to the region in the post-1960s, as sir has already pointed out, for the business purpose and other employment in the region. The second larger group is concentrated mostly in three countries, that is Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana and Suriname, and with substantial number of populations in Jamaica as well, who are the descendants of indentured immigrants, mainly from UP and Bihar. This group immigrated to the region between 1838 and 1917, following the end of slavery and slave trade, and worked as a bonded labor on the sugar plantations there. By the time indentureship ended in 1917, many Indians did not exercise the option to return to India. They chose instead to remain as permanent settlers in the Caribbean, where they bought and rented land to do agriculture and rear cows. By the end of World War II, those who chose to settle in the colonies easily constituted about half of the population of Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. They also form the largest minority in Jamaica, Grenada, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, and St. Kitts. Today, they constitute about 2 million people in the region, Indian diaspora. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have about 1,800 NRIs and 5,55,000 PIOs, which constituted about 39% of the total populations in the country. And St. Vincent and Grenadines, we have 50 NRIs and 3,000 PIOs, and they share 6% of the populations in the country. In Jamaica, we have 4,000 NRIs and 70,000 PIOs, and share the population of 2.36% in the country. And Grenada, another interesting destination for Indians, is we have 200 NRIs and 5,000 PIOs, and share 1.6% of the total population. The interesting thing for these countries is that in the recent years, region is an escape route for many Indians to escaping from tax regime and jurisdiction, promising friendlier and business climate. Earlier it was 10% of applicants from India, but in the last 4 years, 40% increase in applicants coming from India in these Caribbean regions. Many of the Indians target aiming to take paid citizenship, particularly in Dominica, St. Lucia, and Grenada. A report is that there is a report that Mehul Chokshi and that Winsome Diamonds promoter Jatin Mehta have taken citizenship in Antigua and Barbuda and St. Kitts and Nevis respectively. Citizenship through investment has become very popular in this region. And getting Grenadian citizenship is kind of, they think that this is more interesting thing, because it is, if you are getting Grenadian citizenship, then it is open to it's like visa free entry to China, which have already people those who have business with China, then they have the advantage. That is thing. And among the diaspora, Indian diaspora, we have a number of Indians who are in the international recognition. For example, in 1995, there was Basdio Pandey, a lawyer by profession, a trade unionist, and opposition leader with more than 30 years in public life, became the first prime minister, elected prime minister in Trinidad and Tobago. During his term as prime minister, Kamala Prasad Biseswar, which Sir pointed out for the Pravasi, the Bharatiya Divas this thing award, to be appointed as a first Indian woman as Attorney General. Perhaps the other only person who brought international recognition to the Indian presence in the Caribbean is the novelist V.S. Naipaul. He won almost every major literary award in English in the world, and in 2001 won the prestigious Nobel Prize for Literature. Perhaps his most popular novel, A Home for Mr. Biswas, which is based on author's early life in Hindu Trinidad. In Trinidad and Tobago, the Indian heritage had become an integral part of the country's lifestyle and has added significant content and color to the nation's social and cultural mosaic. India's engagement with diaspora, as Priti ma'am has already suggested some of the things, but little going before that, we have two ways of Indian engagement in diaspora. First is that they cater to the needs of NRIs and OCIs by providing them with consular services, protection, and conduct outreach activities to engage with them. At the same time, they create policies to encourage the diaspora to contribute to India's growth through philanthropy, knowledge transfer, investment in innovation, and assistance in other development projects. As the government began to recognize the economic potential of this diaspora, the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi established a special coordination division in the MEA in 1985 as the nodal agency to coordinate matters relating to Indians outside the country. The potential of this diaspora was officially recognized as a reservoir of skill, expertise, knowledge, and investment for the benefit both of the country of their adoption and the land of their origin. The government started approaching diaspora networks and supported initiatives such as Global Convention of Overseas Indians, first convened in New York in 1989, and it aimed at bringing diaspora Indians across the world to a common stage. In 1991, as Pretty Ma'am already said, a significant change came out because of the government reforms, economic reforms and all. That economic reforms not only redefined the character of the Indian economy, but also re-articulated the country's engagement with the rest of the world and allowed foreign intervention in India's development strategy. For example, when Manmohan Singh was a foreign minister, India got like in US dollar 3,289 million in 1991 in terms of remittance. When India government conducted a series of nuclear tests in May 1998, the developed countries' response was moral condemnation and economic sanctions. The government approached the diaspora a special investment opportunity in the form of Resurgent India Bond 1998. This bond helped India withstand India's economic sanctions to a considerable extent. Before 2000, the Indian government did not have a comprehensive policy or structural setup to engage with the diasporic community. A parliamentary committee was instituted by the government to outline the economic strength, cultural concerns, and potentialities of the Indian diaspora. In order to overcome its short-sightedness in its approach towards the Indian diaspora, the government started an NRI PO division within the MEA in 2000. On 18 August 2000, a high-level committee of Indian diaspora, that is LM Shri V committees, ma'am, just you mentioned about, and that Shri V also served as additional secretary of newly created NRI division of MEA. The government established the Ministry of NRI Affairs in May 2004, later renamed as the Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs as the nodal ministry for all matters relating to the Indian diaspora. And Modi government has launched a string of initiatives such as No India program. An online portal has been launched in 2017 exclusively for No India program. Indian origin youth now submit their application online for participate in the No India program to the Indian missions or posts abroad. This program is aimed mostly at Grimitia youth and provides an opportunity for them to better understand and appreciate contemporary India, foster closer ties with the land of their ancestors, and enhance their engagement with India. Homeland visits and diaspora tourism is viewed by some scholars as a prerequisite to contribute constructively to the home country. A number of policies were announced keeping in mind the protection of welfare and interests of Indians abroad. For example, in the 2014 minimum referral wages applicable only to immigration check required countries increased the minimum wages of Indian workers employed as industrial workers, domestic servants, cleaners, and laborers. Furthermore, in 2015, the MEA launched e-migrate system that requires all foreign employers to register in the database. These policies are a step in the right direction. Other youth-centric outreach programs include scholarships to pursue undergraduate courses in recognized universities in India, as well as Bharat Ko Jano online quizzes that test the participants' knowledge of India's heritage, history, and culture. This inaugural quiz in 2016 showed the participation of some 5,000 diaspora youth. To further emphasize the importance of these contributions, the Modi government has dedicated a building in New Delhi to diaspora called the Pravasi Bharatiya Kendra, which is situated in Janakpuri. Responses from the diaspora, according to the government, India has been deeply appreciative of the support of Pravasi Bharatiya community at times of need. However, the capacities of interest of people of Indian origin worldwide vary enormously according to their class compositions and their location. As a result of this, India's engagement with the people of Indian origin has taken on many different forms and occupies so many different spheres. A review of the responses of people of Indian origin underlines the complexity of their different historical trajectories in their different territorial and temporal locations. It is evident that the descendants of Indian immigrants have not responded to calls by India to invest in its economic development, particularly from the Latin American and Caribbean regions. This diaspora cannot be labeled as the lost children of India. The responses made by the descendants of Indian immigrants in regions such as the LAC region need to be read differently, because the metaphors of belonging and obligations to the homeland may have a different meaning for them. And in other way around, like remittances and FDI investment from these particular regions, we do not have, India does not have any significant contributions from these regions. For last part of my presentations is kind of a suggestions. First is continue holding the region's Pravatiya Bharatiya Divas, which have been a very successful way of serving the diaspora on a regional basis and with excellent regions. It would help to open up opportunities in the entire LAC region in key sectors such as tourism, education, agro, processing, health, and other sectors. Second point is clearly identify the list those at MEA who can be contacted to resolve and difficulties and problems faced by the potential attendees, speakers, and VIP guests in an efficient and timely manner. And last point is balance of Pravasi Bharatiya Divas sessions to be more diasporic centered and not overly Indian centric. That's how the diaspora can provide the requisite strategic impulse which make it all more important to unlock the potential. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ghaffar. Before I open the floor for questions, a thought came to my mind. What you said and carried forward thereafter, the transnational identity. Yesterday I was watching the India-West Indies cricket match, and I have been posted in the Caribbean. I have watched a lot of Indian matches. The Caribbean has a difficulty whom to cheer. West Indies is a single team, but when Guyana plays Trinidad, the Guyanese know whom to cheer. But when West Indies team plays India, the Guyanese or Trinidadians have a tough time whom to cheer, so they start picking up a person from their country, their region. India, during the World Cup, it is very easy, whom to cheer. But when it is West Indies, it's always difficult. And yesterday, when the game got washed out, they were more screaming at India for having abandoned the match, not refusing to play because of the outfield was very wet. So you have national identity, you have transnational identity, you have regional identity, and thereafter you have what is called as the cricket identity. And we'll leave it there. Bollywood, by the way, I have started in a Bollywood movie when I was posted in Mauritius, one of the crowd holding a wine glass. Lots of movies are made there. Lots and lots of movies are made. Now, we have 15-20 minutes. Questions, the floor is open, please. Yeah, Aparajita.
If this question could be answered by anybody in the panel. When you were talking, especially Preeti, when she was talking about the sense of within the diaspora policy too, there seems to be a hierarchy, which is clearly evident between the NRIs and the people of Indian origin, and the kind of incentives that was initially given to them and sort of taken back. When we look at India's engagement with Latin America and the Caribbean, in that sense also there is a hierarchy, because the entire focus of all programs, all interest seems to be on the larger continent of South America, to a lesser degree on Central America, and probably always the Caribbean is an afterthought. So, do you think that this diaspora, the policy of diaspora, especially towards people of Indian origin, is a reflection of that? Is that the fact that, you know, the entire region of Latin America is not so important for, you know, the policy makers, and therefore the people of Indian origin who come from the Caribbean even less so, and therefore, you know, they are not what you called as quote unquote an asset for India?
Yeah, we'll take all the questions one go. Yes.
My question is from my field of work, which is cultural studies. And I was wondering whether we can actually make this difference, this technical difference between, you know, that the indentured laborers were not really slaves. Because when we think of slavery, we think of an ancient institution, but slavery is actually a modern institution. And you in fact have, the person who's written most about is the president of Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams, who in Capitalism and Slavery makes the nexus between capitalism and slavery so clear. So I was just going to say whether all these indentured labor who went from UP, Bihar, etc., you know, so I mean, they were the whole question of choice, the freedom. I'm kind of interested in seeing that whether they can be called as, you know, did they have the choice, you know, and in that sense, can't we link them up to the modern institution of slavery? You have modern slavery even today in special economic zones, and you know, so to imagine that slavery is gone is not really true. So that's one part of the question, that you know, how do we relate them to the entire institution of slavery and the attendant subsequent issues of racism? You know, so these are just questions which I have absolutely no idea of in terms of the Indian diaspora in Caribbean. We know what happened to the African diaspora, but about the Indian diaspora in Caribbean is what interests me. And two, that do we have any oral histories, because certainly these people were unlettered people, so do we have any oral histories of these migrations and, you know, people?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Shruti.
Thank you so much, Chair. This question is largely to anybody in the panel. So since yesterday we've been talking about Latin America and the Caribbean, and the focus was that India tends to focus a lot on the continent rather than on the Caribbean islands. So what I find now is that it's a reverse. In terms of diaspora policies, we focus more on the Caribbean rather than on the continent. So my first question is, what is the diaspora in the continent, Central and South America, and how are we engaging with them? The other question is something that stems from what Dr. Preeti was talking about is, my understanding is that the diaspora that we're talking about in the Caribbean went there before independence during the colonial time. So what I want to know is essentially what is the Indian diaspora which is going, is there anything which has been there now in the current, like let's say post-independence, have people gone from India to Latin America and the Caribbean region, so that we have a diaspora which is now not something which is 8th generation, 5th generation, but let's say a first or a second generation diaspora, which I feel would be more connected because they're fresh off the boat. So there would be that connect. And my third question is on the aspect of reconnection between India and the diaspora in the region. If this is a diaspora which has been there for, let's say, 8 generations ago, and they feel that they have roots in India, but I really want to know is what are the aspects on which we can reconnect with them, that we can get them here rather than just getting them here to see their village that was their grandparents, great-grandparents, something beyond that. Thank you.
We have had 1, 2, 3. Okay, let me pick up one more. Yeah, Parjita.
My question actually is somewhat of it stems from Shruti ma'am's question. I understand that there is a Sindhi community in Chile, and there are small pockets of Indian diaspora in the continent itself. While she has already, I'm going to reiterate what she said, saying that the focus on Indian diaspora was in the Caribbean in this session. Is it reflective of how, of what the policy is for India when it looks at the diaspora as the whole for Latin America and Caribbean? And is there a difference between what the policy should be when it comes to Indian diaspora in Latin America and Indian diaspora in the Caribbean?
I think I'm going to stop this round so that some of them I would answer later, but Preeti first, in you.
Okay, I think your two questions seem to be linked in a sense, because what Prajita was asking me is how are they looked upon? I mean, what is the what I would like to say, I mean, I was mentioning the Coolie Odyssey, right? So there was a tendency in India to look down on those who had gone as coolies. So this, call it racist, call it, it was obviously, and they were supposedly from the lower castes, which is not talked about much. Actually, it has been discussed variously in, there's several academic writings on that, on this aspect of it. But a lot of discussions have taken place on how there were actually Brahmins who had gone looking for work. You know, not all of them stayed on, some did come back. So in that sense, yes, a freedom of choice, which is why that writing, which is what I was, you know, referring to, that there was that choice that you could come back, but it was hardly a choice. It was hardly a choice. And that is why scholarship on that and a debate on that it is akin to, you could say, if not, I mean, if we really go by the academic definition of what is slavery and what is indentured labor, perhaps not slavery, but it was almost akin to that. And therefore this tendency amongst the Indians to look down upon the East Indians from, from the Caribbean region. This has changed, I think. It has been changing. Especially when you read some literature of the Caribbeans who have now moved to Canada or North America, and they're describing their experiences, where they're talking about how, they look up to the Indians, they want to go to the Indian temples, Hindu temples, not Indian, sorry, Hindu temples, and there they find that things are so very being done a little differently from how they would do it. And so certain comments made by the Indians, the South Asians in North America, to an East Indian or a Caribbean, Indo-Caribbean person would be that, oh, you don't really know what India is, you see. And the repartee to that, look, we know what Indian culture was at our time, and we are practicing that vis-a-vis you, South Asians, who are not. Actually, so this kind of a debate, and then you see the kind of temples, for example, are very different from the Hindu temples here in India, whereas, and there in North America as well. And then you would see slight differences about how it's more like a Christian church, and those kind of descriptions you find in the writings. You also brought up Eric Williams. He had come up with the PNM, the first, in 1956. Again, this has been debated, but Eric Williams was trying to, with the PNM, with the People's National Movement, this political party that he came up with, he was trying to bring the Indians and the Africans together, from my understanding. But the Indians took offense to the way in which he went about it. They thought he was anti-Indian. You know, and from then on you see that, I mean, this is just post-independence, you see the antagonism, if you will, building up between the parties, politically, I'm talking about political, not social and cultural. Anyway, so indentured labor in that sense obviously was, look, I'm forgotten the thing.
I'll just respond to the indentured labor.
Yes.
Before you start, let me once again make a point which I made earlier. The word Indian diaspora, is definable. And I gave 3 types of diaspora. I can break it up still further. For example, if you take East Africa diaspora is of a different nature than all others. Then you have the Malaysian, Southeast Asian, Sri Lankan. There's another group. Even amongst the Mauritian and the Caribbean diaspora, there's a difference. For a Mauritian, the first port of call was Bombay. For a Guyanese, the first port of call is Miami. Were they volunteer or free migrant? That's again the question. They were free to return, but could they? Did they have the wherewithal to return? So how do you classify them? If you go beyond it, then you come, as I earlier said, the recent migration diaspora to North America and Europe. They're a different class altogether. Then of course you have the Gulf, a huge one. Within the Gulf we have sections. The Dubai UAE belt is different from the rest. So each one is different, and for this session, you said you're all talking about the Caribbean, what happened to Latin America. We are here talking about numbers. Here I have the numbers as on 31st December 2018. We are talking about 1.3 million versus 23,000. Now that is what the numbers are. You take the Chilean ambassador is here. Let me give you the number which I have of Chile, which is 1,400, which seems to be also an approximation head count. Well, the Guyanese here, my number is 327,000. So these are the classically different. 200 years old. I don't know how many years old. Could be 20 to 80 years old. So classes are different. So to confine ourselves to this particular one, the diaspora we are talking about is identities, which Professor Preeti Singh spoke about. The transnational identity, the national identity, and now the growing new identity of, for example, in Toronto, where I visit quite often, you have the Indo-Caribbean versus the Indian recent immigrant there, and one selling dal puri, the other one saying puri, aloo puri. They're two different. Dal puri is different from aloo puri. So with that, you want to add something?
I just want to respond Madam's query about regarding the indentured, whether it was by choice or it was by compulsion. It is a kind of both, because if you look at during the 19th century, middle 19th century, so there were some famine, some drought all across these states of India. And apart from that, when in 1833, when the slavery system was ended, so they had to relocate from where the laborers can. So again, what they did is, the colonial masters, what they did is, so they have appointed the agents, who is widely known as architeers. So what they used to do from the Bihar and UP and some parts of Odisha and other parts also, Bengal and all, and what they used to do is, they used to pick up people and allure them. You will give them good jobs, you will have some savings, you will have some good life. Apart from that, even some widows, those, because that time this Sati Praha was there, so some widows, they had allured them and wooed them and taken them. So this architects has a greater role to play. So that is a choice to some extent, and it is a by choice allurement to some extent. So it is a mix of both. And other thing which what Dr. Stuti has talked about, because this is widely, mostly we have talked about Caribbeans, Indian diaspora in the Caribbeans. As Ambassador pointed out, it is true that the large number of are concentrating there in the Caribbean region. But from the Caribbean perspective, how we need to enroll to those countries, particularly to Latin America, to some extent, as transnationalism has also discussed, how we can move further to America to cater the Indian diaspora there. I mean, not the old diaspora. As far as you talked about the diaspora, let us understand diaspora in two connotations. One is new diaspora and another is old diaspora. New diaspora, those who have recently migrated from, last 20, 30, 40 years to Asia, Malaysia and America and Europe, and the old diaspora is largely referred to the indentured laborers and the classical diaspora. This way we can reach to the I'm just giving a reference. In America, you have lot many in New York particularly, you have around 10 million people are from Caribbean region, largely from Guyana. And also in Netherlands also you will find lot many people. So through this, how you can make an inroad to and cater to their needs and inroad to their cultural habits, that is the major questions to be addressed. Hence, these countries, particularly in Caribbean, needs to be focused and needs to be discussed. And it is a compulsion, not by choice. Thank you.
You want to add anything?
Yes, sir. Two quick points. From the back, actually, one question came about this Latin America issues. Sir also pointed out about that Chile, we have 1,400 NRIs and 1,300 PIOs, and we have 2,700 OCIs, and in all the countries of Latin America, we have insignificant number of actually diaspora. That's why those numbers are not much important. Important countries for example, Guyana, we have 51% of Indian diaspora in that country. So those countries we have mentioned, and for example, Belize, we have 6% of the population's country is the contributions in the total population of the country. So those countries actually are important. So other countries for example Brazil and all are insignificant amount of populations they have in their population. That's why we miss out. And second question raised by Stuti ma'am is we do not have a specific India's engagement policy with the Latin America and Caribbean diaspora actually. So that's why actually I recommend that Indian diaspora should have kind of Pravasi Bharatiya Divas on regional basis, like we did in Mauritius in 2016 and Singapore in 2018. That's how actually we can have more connections and more cooperations in other sector as well. And we have so many Caribbean migrated to US or UK. For one example is there is a person called Ashok Ramsaran, who is the president of Indian Diaspora Development Council in New York. So those persons actually we can utilize and can take help from those personalities. That's it. Thank you.
One thing, because as far as you referred to the regional diasporic Pravasi Day, so in Guyana, in Trinidad Tobago and Suriname also, they do celebrate the on arrival day, Indian on arrival day. I think if I'm wrong, so Ambassador can correct me. On arrival day.
Yes, I'm the High Commissioner from Guyana, like I said. There are a number of inaccuracies, but I'm more concerned about maybe the general feeling that you're giving about the diaspora in, as you call it, diaspora in a place in a country like Guyana. In Guyana, we refer to those people as Indo-Guyanese. They are Guyanese. They're not really a part of the diaspora. And maybe some of the more recent diasporic communities, say in America, we would refer to as NRIs. They're kind of Indians, but they're not resident in India. And as you said, I mean, the first arrival of Indians, the indentured labor type Indians in Guyana, occurred in, I think it was 1838, about more than 150 years ago. In fact, just earlier this year, Shri Mishra, from the Director General of the ICCR, unveiled exactly what you spoke about, a big monument there, the Indian Arrival Monument. I actually have pictures of it in my, because I saw it myself for the first time a few days ago. But the point I'm making is that I think you say that there's a big percentage of people of Indian origin in Guyana, which is true. The people of Indian origin in Guyana is something like 43%. But it's still, in Indian terms, a small number. The whole population of Guyana is less than 1 million. So, I know people laugh, but which brings me to the point, which is that I think one of the biggest difference to my mind between Indians, in India and the Indians who went out in that first flow of indentured laborship, and all the stories you told, the anecdotal stories of people being picked up on the wharves and that kind of thing, all of that kind of stuff did happen. I've actually spoken to people who tell you stories. Their grandfather was playing marbles and some guy came and told them you can go on a ship, and there he was. But most of them came from an area in Bihar. This is why they speak Bhojpuri in Guyana still even now, and things like that. But the main point I wanted to make about them, which we in the Caribbean, I think, certainly note, in some way are proud of, is the massive personal development that population underwent once it had come out of India and was in the Caribbean. So, for example, the very first national political leader in Guyana was someone called Cheddi Jagan, who I'm sure a lot of you know. What you may not know was that his father was an actual migrant, an indentured laborer, who went to Guyana as a semi-skilled laborer. So in one generation, you move from a semi-skilled laborer to a man who studied dentistry at Northwestern University in America. He married one of the Rosenbergs, who were like left-wing royalty in American society. And she herself, and Janet Jagan, his wife, came back to Guyana, and he became president after a long time in 1992, and she actually became the first female president of Guyana herself when he died. Now, that story of social political progress, if whatever you want to call it, is, I would have thought, of unheard of here. I don't think you would start from an agricultural semi-skilled laborer and the next generation have a president of India or a prime minister of India. And I think that, so while there is much to be concerned about the conditions of indentured laborship and all of what it stood for, in terms of the social progress of those who in the end went through that unwillingly, we in the Caribbean feel there's a lot to celebrate in terms of what it says about what is possible in terms of the human development of some of these communities. And you spoke about someone being the president of a diasporic community in New York. Like I said, we have actually had people of Indian origin, 1 or 2 generations removed, who have been presidents of our country. Well, 1 in this case. So we, while talking about the diasporic communities in the Caribbean, those first indentured laborship, indentured laborers and what they did, we think there's a lot to commend in the story of what they were able to achieve. And have to balance that against all the indignities and sufferings and so on that they and many of the other populations that were transplanted into our part of the world did suffer. So I just make that comment and try to maybe correct the sense you may have of what these people were and what they've achieved.
I just wanted to mention in response to your comment about slavery and indentured labor. Earlier this year, the council, ICWA, had hosted a lecture by the President of South Africa. It was under the aegis of IBSA, India, Brazil, South Africa. And in his speech, when he was talking about the Indian diaspora in South Africa, he likened indentured labor to slavery. So, as you have mentioned,
the same theme is emerging from other sections as well. I just wanted to say that.
Let me answer yours, Stuti, about oral history. Each region has its own system of oral history. I'm aware of many in Guyana, many in Mauritius, two places I lived, of various ones. So these stories are available, are being rebuilt, are being cleaned up as time goes on, as more and more data emerges, including the point of origin as to who they were, from where they came. Was it Ara district or was it just Chota Nagpur? So these things, the oral histories do exist and they're being developed from time to time. I wanted to mention that. At this stage, I'm running out of time, and before my mic is switched off, let me make just 2 points. I'm going not just 1 point, and I'm going to make it in a very light fashion so that we end this with a light. We had a lot of very serious discussion. Is when I was High Commissioner to Guyana, High Commissioner, you must hear this. Somebody said, "Do you represent? I mean, you seem to represent the whole of Guyana." I said, "No, no, no." I thought the person had made a mistake. I said, "I'm not the Guyanese Commissioner to India. I'm the Indian High Commissioner to Guyana." He said, "No." He said, "Guyana has got 3 communities. The Indians there are called East Indians. And the originals were called Amerindians, and the rest are called West Indians." So he said, "You do represent the East Indians, the West Indians, and the Amerindians." So that's how it is. That's how that entire community is made of. And each one of the points made here is right. In terms of recommendations, well, we have the next session when recommendations are made. From this panel, I do not have any specific recommendation which came out to be conveyed to the next group. What is left for me is to thank ICWA for giving us this platform, to the 3 panelists for giving their views, and this packed hall for having listened to all of us with due attention. Thank you very much. Now, to you, Shruti.
Thank you so much, sir, for chairing this session. We will take just a 5-minute break so that we can rearrange the table for the next session. If you would like, you can kindly be seated. We'll just take another 5 minutes. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, can we settle down, please? Can we settle down, please? Ma'am, Dr. Gupta. Ma'am, they're also talking. Thank you so much, everybody, for being present here for the next session. Thank you, John, for doing that for me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for waiting for this much-awaited roundtable discussion, which will be chaired by our Joint Secretary from Latin America Division in the MEA, Ms. Jyotsna Patel. Over to you, ma'am. Yojana Patel. Sorry. Yeah, guys.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased and glad to be part of this wrap-up session, if I may say, of the seminar. And I would like to thank ICWA and DG in particular for taking this initiative and having this nearly 2-day seminar where all aspects of our relationship with a very vibrant region have been discussed at length. What we have now is a roundtable format where we have basically 2 topics to cover. One will be India-LAC relations, I suppose a more general and a larger view of where we stand vis-a-vis the region. And secondly, LAC studies in India and Indian studies in LAC countries. Again, a very interesting topic because entities and organizations and institutes of excellence like ICWA have a very big role to play in putting across the Indian narrative in Latin America, and hopefully we should receive the other narrative as well. So the topic, even though at point 2, I would say for me as a Joint Secretary is at point 1, because if I see India-LAC relations and I see a number of people who have been present at the inaugural session, our Honorable MOS, Mr. Muraleedharan, had laid out the state of play, how we see our relations with LAC in a very comprehensive manner. So I would not dwell at length on that because I think all of you were present, you've heard, and it was a very, very detailed way in which we discussed each and every aspect of our engagement with the region. But at the cost of repeating myself, I will just, should I say, summarize a few elements which I would like all of you to pay attention to. I would like to start by saying that India-LAC relations, when I see it in a broader sense, are in a very robust and in a very sound footing today. At no time in our history have our ties been so vibrant and so promising. India sees LAC region not only as a strong, long-standing friend, a very sympathetic interlocutor, but also as a promising partner for addressing its rising food and energy requirements. As we grow as a nation, as we increase our consumptions, we will look to other parts of the globe, not necessarily our own country, for certain needs. Food and energy are two needs which are very easily fulfilled, if I see, from the LAC region because of the huge natural and other resources which are present in the region. Without dwelling on the past, let me make a more recent and a more contemporary assessment on our state of relations. It is not that high-level engagements did not take place in the past. They have been visits to and fro, and a very remarkable one was in 1968 when Indira Gandhi toured the region, and it is still remembered very fondly. But what has happened in the past 5 years has been a very remarkable and a very unmistakable intensification. Honorable Prime Minister visited the region thrice, Brazil in 2014, Mexico in 2016, and Argentina in 2018. We had similarly Honorable President visiting the region on 2 occasions in 2 years, where he went to Suriname and Cuba in 2018, Bolivia and Chile in 2019. And Vice President similarly visited Guatemala, Panama and Peru in 2018, and Paraguay and Costa Rica in 2019, in total covering another 5 major countries of the region. So apart from what we see at the higher levels, there have been other engagements, other visits which have taken place with regularity, at least in the last 5 years. And at ministerial levels, we have visited each and every of the 33 countries in the past 5 years, which is truly unprecedented. So this gives us an element of thought, I would say. We should dwell on this element, whether these many visits in the past 5 years have actually added more content, more vibrancy to our bilateral relations. What we now need to understand is that this momentum needs to be fostered and strengthened. And apart from these meetings, the very vital institutional dialogue mechanisms need to be revived. This would translate into having JCMs, FOCs, JCMs meaning the Joint Commissions, the FOCs meaning the Foreign Office consultations, trade and other mechanisms happening at regular and periodic intervals. They do happen once in a while, but if we see the gaps, we see many gaps, 5 years, 10 years, some even more. This is not sustainable if we want to make a new template of our relationship with Latin America. So a regular, periodic, active institutional dialogue is also necessary between countries of LAC and India. What will be the reason behind us pushing these institutional mechanisms and other high-level visits? The major overarching goal is to revitalize, re-energize and contemporize our engagement with this very fast developing region. We've had historical links, but the time has come when we have to reassess our relationship in the modern context. That is happening, but it needs to be quickened, it needs to be furthered. The success of our upscaled engagement will, however, only yield results if both sides are equally committed and proactive in implementing the decisions flowing out of these high-level and other engagements. That is another very important point. When we see the relationship, a lot has happened, a lot of good meetings, good engagements, not only in the G2G format, but also B2B formats at the people-to-people level have happened. But somehow they are a one-off. There is very little implementation, there is very little follow-up. And if I see the list of engagements, agreements, MOUs which we deal with all the 33 countries, it's a very healthy list. But they have not been implemented. So the challenge will be to implement the decisions of what our leaders and our other ministers have decided. They go all that way to discuss with their counterparts, and likewise counterparts from the region travel to India, but the follow-up is very tardy on both sides. So this is a very important point which we need to highlight, pursue and fulfill. In our assessments on the trade front, the economies of LAC have a huge potential, and according to some estimates, it will collectively be a 5 trillion economy in the next 10 years. This is what the international research agencies are projecting. And we are also likely to be another 5 trillion economy in the next few years. So there is much that can happen between both sides, and we hope that it will take place. With India's own growth trajectory being a success, the time is ripe for diversifying and deepening our trade and economic partnership with LAC. For the moment, there is only a limited basket of commodities that we trade with only a limited set of countries. This diversification, both in the trade basket as well as the geographic spread, needs to be given due importance, which is happening, but it is happening very slowly. It is also noteworthy that in the past 2 decades, trade has surged from 1.7 billion in 2001 to nearly 40 billion in 2018. And the remarkable thing about this is that it has all been industry driven. There has been support from the government side, but it is the industry which has taken the lead to go to Latin America and find avenues for cooperation. So this is remarkable. If this much can take place, which is industry driven, with a little help, with a little assistance from the government side, I'm sure the picture will be much more brighter. We can move from, say, a 40 billion to another 40 or 50 in the next 5 years. It sounds plausible, it sounds practical, but there is work to be done. This would certainly need some assistance from governments on both sides, and given that trade with LAC appears or happens entirely within the numerous trade blocks of the region, we have to prioritize the expansion of the existing PTAs with Mercosur and Chile, and the completion of ongoing negotiations with Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. This is very essential in taking the next leap in our bilateral relations in trade, as tariff regimes in these blocks are naturally indisposed to non-bloc countries like India. So we solicit the active cooperation of countries in the region to make this expansion possible. This is a priority that we are working for, and I think the support of countries from LAC will be very crucial in expanding the PTAs. If this takes place, it creates a more level playing field for our industry, and the next leap, as we are dreaming of, as we are aspiring for, can take place. The economic success stories in LAC have another common thread. It is seen that wherever Indian companies or Latin American countries working in India have set up local production, including joint ventures and tie-ups, assembly units or warehousing, they have been able to carve out a niche for themselves. This is one template which is already a success story between India and LAC. So we should be pushing not only for increase in trade of goods, but also joint production. And this is something which has come off often and again in our dealings with our interlocutors in the region. I think this should be given due importance. The other major pillar of our relationship with Latin America is in development partnership projects. And like Honorable MOS pointed out at the inaugural session, till date, operative lines of credit worth nearly 2,069 crores and grants in aid worth nearly 69 crores have been given by the government of India to various countries in Latin American region. But what we have seen is that in some cases, due to quick responses and enthusiasm of the partner countries, we have been able to make rapid progress, and completion of these projects has been in a time-bound manner. But in other cases, the implementation has been tardy and has been long pending. So the line of credit was offered years back, but we have still not been able to either finalize proposals or take sanctions. So it's in limbo for a very long time. This has not actually helped in increasing goodwill in the region, And the onus lies on both sides, some on the Indian side, some on Latin American countries and our partners in the region. So we must find out ways by which, when we are working on projects like these, development projects in the region, we are able to finish them in a time-bound manner. This is very essential to our bilateral relations with the region as a whole. In the field of culture, much has been said. We've just had a discussion on that. I would not like to dwell at length on it, but it is suffice to underline that India has an umbilical link with the people of Indian origin in the Caribbean and elsewhere, and we intend to continue deepening our relations with our diaspora in the Caribbean. But what is required now is to have not only the diaspora as the focus of our engagement, but all other communities, all other ethnic groups. It should be a very inclusive kind of an outreach. This is something which is a priority now, and we intend to continue with this. Latin America has been traditionally one of the most welcoming regions to Indian culture, philosophy, yoga, Ayurveda, food, etc. And another surprising element is that this has happened without any promotion from our side. It is suo moto. They are enamored of Indian culture, and a lot can be done to further our cultural outreach to the region. There is already a very receptive audience, some people who are deeply in love with Indian culture, but their enthusiasm needs to be supported by the government of India, which we are trying to do as much as possible. In the past, we have had a number of festivals of India. We have had a number of cultural troops going into the region and coming back with a wonderful response. But what is now required is to enrich this further by offering more scholarship for local talent. There are many who practice, for example, our arts on their own, but have not been able to avail of scholarships and other training programs from the government of India side. What we would like to do now is to give them more avenues to come to India to learn our culture in whatever way, in whatever manner they would like to, but their aspirations are met. The other important element is that in the popular culture of Latin America, or should I say, in say television or in the media, there is very little visibility of India or content from India, audiovisual content, and it is more so in India. We hardly have anything in popular news or popular websites or popular mainstream media, print media, etc., where we deal on issues which are India, Latin America, or simply about Latin America. This is something which has inhibited a better understanding of each other's priorities, of each other's political goals in both sides. So this is something which we feel should be addressed. In the long run, it will help in a closer and a better understanding between Latin America and India. So this is something which I would request our honorable ambassador sitting here, and we've spoken to them earlier that this absolute absence, if I may say, of Latin America, any stories coming from Latin America, I'm sure there's much that would be appealing to an Indian audience, and likewise in Latin America about India. This is a gap which we need to fill. So with that, I would rest my initial remarks, and I would now request our ambassadors from LAC regions to maybe make their comments for 10 minutes each, after which we may open the floor for question and answers, and maybe towards the end we can bring together some recommendations, some conclusions to this debate. Thank you. I think we'll go around the table.
No,
Pardon?
he's raised his flag.
Okay. Yes. Yes, Your Excellency.
Good afternoon. Let me congratulate this initiative. We can close ties between both parties, India, Latin American, and the Caribbean. A few months ago, I told the previous Minister of Commerce, Mr. Prabhu, that in the political field, we have done the task. With his own visit in Panama, okay, with the visit you have mentioned also, of the Vice President Naidu in Panama. Also last year, my Vice Minister of External Relations came to India to celebrate our first political consuls, okay? And we have done in the political field the task, okay? And I told him in that occasion, we are ready to the next level. What's the next level? To explore the possibilities to negotiate an agreement, free trade agreement, okay? And in front of my colleagues, ambassadors, he told me, okay, here are my sector. They are ready. Okay, next coming up, very soon I will bring also my sector to India. But let me tell you something else, because we are not only Panama, we are Latin America and the Caribbean, also we are Central American. As Central America, I have to tell you something else. We are the only region who has a kind of agreement with European Union, okay? It's an association agreement with a political chapter, with a cooperation chapter, and of course, a free trade agreement, okay? The same agreement we recently signed a few weeks ago with UK. As you know, UK and Brexit, okay? And we recently signed the same agreement, association, okay? According to my knowledge, we have pending as Central America a meeting with India. I think it would be very interesting to explore also the possibilities as Central American countries, to explore the possibilities to reach a free trade agreement. This is the idea I have launched today, and we are ready also to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Your point is well taken. We have a very, should I say, growing relationship with SICA, which is the group of Central American states, and we've already had 3 meetings at the ministerial level, which we intend to do the next session of in the near future. So it is very much on the cards. The only problem was that because of the elections in India in this year, there were some scheduling issues. But our collaboration with SICA, that is the organization, is very vibrant, and we look forward to working very closely with Panama to take this forward. Thank you. The floor is now with Ambassador of Chile.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. It's a very good and instructive today's seminar. Yesterday was very clear, the messages of the Minister of State, and also what it was discussed today, and the economic and well, the rest of the day. And this is a very good opportunity also for us to socialize some points with the person who is in charge, of course, of leading this process from the Indian side, which is the Joint Secretary Latin America. Some ideas, I will speak less than 10 minutes. I think it's important for all people to recognize that Latin America and the Caribbean is a very wide and a lot of differences region inside. We are not one single package when you are talking about Latin America and the Caribbean. So you need to recognize that different countries have different interests and different levels of, let's say, development, different levels of different sizes, different visions, different ways of solving problems, and different mentalities. It is not one package. One size fits all strategy will not work well in the region. Having said that, seen as a region, seen from India, we have a lot of points in common that sometimes they are not sufficiently highlighted. For instance, seen from here, I think our region is the region where no threats are coming from to India. No threats in any sense. No problems in terms of well, any seeing from Europe also, they have, for instance, migration threats coming from Africa, for instance. Seeing from here, from our region, is very constructive and a very good complementary approach to what India could say. Reforms of the United Nations, environment, peace, democracy, etc. So we have a complementary vision that could be better used sometimes in the international arena. Of course, when we have political consultations, we are now planning to have our 7th meeting of political consultations with India. We are hoping to have that soon. Of course, all these global subjects will be on the agenda, but in general, I could say that we have quite common points of view, which is very good, and we have to. There is a potential there with the whole region, with 33 countries in the United Nations system. It is something that counts. I'm not saying that the all 33 countries are the same, but as a whole, in general, we have similar approaches. I said that countries are different. That is true. In the terms of the bilateral relation, India should identify what are the weaknesses and the fortress, the points in common they could work together. It is not the same the approach as a country like Chile, for instance, with Argentina or Brazil. It's different. I mean, I'm not saying that it's completely different, but it is some differences that the good identification could help a lot on the policies and the policies implemented together. We have a very let's say different approach on how to solve problems. It is also meaning that we have also a different offer to India. Not everyone is offering the same to the country. So the ability should be discover which elements are more prior. I mean, I have heard sometimes the prioritization concept, because India will not start with the 33 at the same time. It is impossible. Practically, it's not doable. So, in terms of prioritization, the identification of what every country has to offer is could be fruitful exercise from the Indian side. We are also doing the same. In our case, we are identifying which sectors, for instance, are of more interest for us to go together. And you are witnessing our efforts to identify 7, 8, 9 sectors in which we find that could be useful for both sides. You talk about gaps in your introduction. It is true. the visit of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was very important for the region, and it is in our embassy we have pictures of that. But that was 51 years ago, something like that. And that is 2 generations from the people I'm seeing here, is two generations. So of course they don't know what the meaning of that. And of course the Prime Minister of India, according to my recall, has not made any bilateral visits to the region in the last, I don't know, 40 years or more. Prime Minister Modi was there, but in the framework of regional gatherings or global gatherings, at G20 or whatever, but global gatherings, and with no bilateral visit even to the countries he was visiting. I think now they are planning to bilateral visit to Brazil in the framework of the BRICS. But again, it is in the framework of something they are, doing this visit. It could be a good thing if the political leadership, will, pay some bilateral on the region. Of course, we are very much happy to have a Prime Minister in our case, of course. But as a region, it is true that the last one was 51 years ago. And the recall of that is, I will not say completely lost, but almost for a lot of people. I stop here, and I will come back if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think what you said is very true, that a lot of visits, especially at Prime Minister level, have happened on the sidelines of other major events. But you will agree that other high-level visits, like of the President and Vice President, have been standalone. So there's a balance, and a lot of these things are good for their own sake. So I would prefer to at least be visible rather than no visibility. So something is better than nothing. Instead of having large gaps or decades when nobody has traveled, there is some merit in seeing that my leaders go to the region. And likewise, Latin American leaders have regularly come to India, have come very regularly, and we are expecting your president next year, early next year. So I'm sure you will be very happy to have that interaction. So the interaction may be in India or in Latin America. So long as it's an interaction, I'm happy with that. What you said about the various and distinct regional differences, your point is very valid, Ambassador. It is very true that a country in Central America will have very little to say something on the mainland or maybe with Caribbean. But if you see India's bilateral interaction, we have made provision for that. Apart from the bilateral strand, we are very actively involved in the regional groupings. And be it a separate track for India-SICA, which is the Central American organization, or with India-CARICOM, where we have a separate strand of bilaterals only with the grouping of CARICOM, and with the Pacific Alliance, where you are a leader. So we have a distinct strand of our engagement with the regional blocs. We are wanting to upscale our engagement from an observer to an associate states, and we have been asking for the support of countries like Chile, Peru and others to see that India moves from a present dormant state to a more active state in these organizations. Be it with Mercosur, again the same situation. We have a track which is totally on the regional organizations. So I think we have a balance between the two. And I think I take your point that there has to be a prioritization of what we do with various countries, and I think it is being done in one way or the other. But there is much to be covered, because if you see the history of the last 70 odd decades and what we are doing now or starting on now, there is a point at which the differences will start to kick in. So I'm sure you are you appreciate the fact, and we need to prioritize. I agree with that. Thank you, Ambassador. I would then give the floor to the Ambassador from Cuba. Sir, the floor is yours.
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to thank you. This seminar for most of us was very, very interesting. I think it's a good idea, and as yesterday was said, it's a pity that we only organize this kind of conference once every 2 years or whatever. So I congratulate the ECWF for this good initiative, and also from the Ministry of External Affairs. In the case of my country, I will say that, of course, the condition of my country are, like in many others, Latin America and the Caribbean, different. We have a diverse of situation. And we, since many years, we had with India very good political relation. And I can say that this relation is still there. And that is, of course, a good base, and has been a good base for the development of other sectors of our relation. I want to say, for example, the economic relation. It has been starting since several years, and we are receiving from your government credit LOC that, of course, permit us to develop some projects that are very important in sectors in which we need it, like renewable energy and so on. And we are very happy. We are also working in biotech, trying to make mixed production. So that means that we are working in good sector that has future for our little Iceland. Where I really think we should make a more effort. I mean, Cuba, including our part, is related to what I have been told before, trade. The condition of trade between Cuba and India is very low. I remember when I came here was about 98 or something like that, and now it's 42, 43 millions. And from that mainly is export to Cuba, but import to India is very little. And we have a very specific condition that you all know. We have already that mentioned, and you know that very well. And that is, of course, the economic blockade in which we are, that not permitted us, for example, to make transfer that help the export or import for product. So I think that, and perhaps that is valid also for other Latin America, we should think how India could make more financial facilities for trade, so that the Indian small and little companies can export their product to those countries that they are in a low possibility to buy directly, or to export products to here. That is one point. The other point that I agree with you 100%. We have a lot of, for example, a lot of agreement and a lot of MOU with India, and mainly in the last year in healthcare. Now we're trying to do with Ayurveda and so on. But we have the feeling that, I mean, that is also our responsibility, that sometimes this kind of agreement, they don't implement as fast or as rush as we wanted. And I think that is a point that we have to see how we can work together. And related to culture, I think that totally in Latin America, but perhaps mainly in the Caribbean, we need to increase our connectivity. And when I say connectivity, I mean tourism that gives us the possibility to know each other better. And according to that possibility, then we can make in the future more business. We are discovering ourselves. And that's, I mean, that is very, very important that India could play a role in tourism in our area. This is what I wanted to recommend. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Could I give some remarks to what Ambassador has said before we move to yours, so that it doesn't slip my mind? What you said, Ambassador, about relations with Cuba, we have had a very strong relation with Cuba, and like you said, it is irrespective of what happens at the larger global stage. We continue to be as close as we have been in the past. That's point number one. Point number two, about financing facilities, which you mentioned. Currently, we do not have Indian banks operating in Latin America, so we are restricted from that point of view. But what has been a thinking within ministries and other quarters of the government of India has been that we could perhaps partner with Pan-American banks like the Inter-American Bank. We would like to be partners, or we could like to be, closely associated with them, so that if not, our own banking institutions, but our closer cooperation with prominent banks in Latin America could open up some avenues for better trade and investments in the region. You would also be happy to know that India is now the major international development partner of the Caribbean Development Fund, where we have put in 1 million very recently in June. And this is just one step which we would like to take to facilitate projects which are being done in the region, smaller ones, medium ones, but there is some amount of financing which is available. You would also know that under the India fund which we have at the United Nations, again on South-South cooperation, we have taken the lead, and there is a corpus of money which is available for projects in the Latin American region. Of course, people taking up that credit, taking up those available resources is another big challenge. You really don't know who's going to avail of it. For example, if I recall in SICA, for each of the 8 members of the SICA countries in 2015, at the ministerial level meeting, we made 30 million funds available as line of credit, but till date, no country has availed of that. So there is, I think, a gap between what we are offering and what is being taken. So a review must be done as to identify the factors which are inhibiting a more, should I say, better utilization of what we have. There is no dearth of of resources at the present moment, but we are not using them to the maximum. So there needs to be more thinking on this issue. On tourism, very rightly you said that tourism can be a big bond between, a very big bond between India and Latin America. You are already aware that India has extended e-visa facility to all 33 countries in the region, and some countries have already made a better and a more facilitative visa regime for Indian tourists and Indian businessmen. But I think if more the remaining countries in Latin America could also think of similar measures like we have taken, it could be a very big service to strengthening the tourism sector, because tourists, as you know, will not be running or standing in a queue for a very long time. It's more of of contemporizing your relationship. If you want if a Latin American person wants to come to India, he needs to go nowhere. It's online available. E-visa is made for for all 33 countries of the region. It's very simple, it's very seamless, and it has brought in the numbers. But something on these lines should be thought of from LAC countries as well, if you want more Indian tourists in the region, because there is a growing middle class in India which has the money and the means at its disposal to travel all the way, because distances are also a very big factor, and there is no direct connectivity between India and Latin America. So he has to go via Europe or via US to reach any one of the beautiful, amazing countries of Latin America. But it means a lot of money. And if on top of that he is hassled for tourist visa, I don't think it makes good sense. So some kind of a facilitation on these lines is recommended, I would say, at this point of time. Thank you. The floor is to the ambassador from Argentina.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Patel. Let me start by thanking the organizers for the timeless opportunity of calling this roundtable and the whole event that you have held in ICWA. I will start by saying that it would be very good if by the next event ICWA calls we can see a different map in the seal, because that would be a very good way of starting to make our region visible, because not even in this seminar the region is visible. So that's a point that I would like to stress. I think that the Minister of State gave a very important speech in which he established the basis. So I would not like to go into it. I would like to just stress one point that you mentioned today, and that was the lack of implementation of the agreements. And I believe that going backwards, if there were visits or not visits, or if there is connectivity, if we are far away or we are not far away, I think that it's at this point in time not the key issue, the key element. The main point is, if we reach an agreement, let's try to implement that agreement. And there is where my feeling after a few months here in India is that when you get to the level of the bureaucracy, you get lost the political will of the leadership. I'm not saying that this happens only in India, but this lack of transmission of political will to the bureaucracies is one of the main issues that we have to stress. In this regard, I believe that one element that is, I don't know if it's missing or it's not there yet, it's how we organize South-South cooperation. You've dealt with that point. You said that you have put a lot of money in SICA, a lot of money in the organization, in the UN Commission for South-South. But the main problem is that when you come to discuss with the Indian government about South-South, you don't have anyone to whom you have to address to discuss the issue. You have to go ministry by ministry. So in that regard, you lose completely the political sense of the whole package of cooperation. So that's something that I believe is lacking somewhere there. If you go to DPA in MEA, in the Ministry of External Affairs, you get all the cooperation that India is giving, but you cannot centralize anything that you want to make a whole package and have an holistic view on what the cooperation between the two countries to implement the agreement. You don't have that kind of centralized possibility. And I believe that that will help a lot us in the embassies to identify where we can touch upon those issues so as to have that holistic view with a political component in it, so as to push for the agreements. And the other element that I think it's very important in what you say is the possibility of having national content of our countries in public broadcasting, in the public broadcasting system. And that's something that I think it's maybe up to us to do it, but it will be a good idea if we can have as a group the possibility of developing with the MEA some kind of program within the broadcasting system of India, the public one, the possibility of having a program about Latin America or individual programs about our countries, and that will facilitate. And the other way around, to exchange that with programs of India in our public systems. So I'll stop here. Those were the two main comments I wanted to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. You've always been unsparing in your comments, and I appreciate you for that. And the fact is that you've drawn attention to a very vital aspect of our relationship, that is the implementation of what already exists. If we are able to do that, you will see a different phase of our ties with the region. It exists, but in a very unutilized manner. So I think I take your point, and so far as building content for mainstream media is concerned, a Ministry of External Affairs had in the last 1 year sent out requests to our missions that we should reach out to our partner countries and see if there is a possibility of exchange of contents between the public broadcasters. That can be a first step, because after that the rest of the field is commercial, it is in private hands. But between government broadcasters we had given that possibility. I don't know whether that message has reached your part of the world, but it is doable. We have already mooted this idea. That is just for your information. Thank you, Ambassador. Madam from Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for taking the time out to host this afternoon session, and I would like to express my appreciation to the Indian Council on World Affairs for putting together this initiative. The theme of the initiative is building bridges, and we've spent a lot of time over the last 2 days looking at the theoretical aspect of it, looking at the historical aspect of it. But in order to cement those bridges, to carry us from where we are to where we'd like to be, we really need to start to project. Trinidad and Tobago and India has a long history stemming back to the 19th century. And even though our history is long and deep and evident, we've not had that level of engagement that we really should have in recent time. Yes, we support each other at the multilateral levels. Yes, we are voting for each other at the UN and all of that. We've signed the MOUs. We've had a number of agreements that have been outstanding, and we've been very tardy with respect to our Foreign Office and joint consultations. However, as technocrats, there's only so much that we can do to seal those relationships. And we have to start looking at ways and means of engagement outside of the technical level to allow for greater flows in terms of people, in terms of trade, in terms of cultural exchanges. Because as a technocrat, we can produce the MOUs and sign and agree and follow up. But unless the people are integrating at the lower levels, there will be no trade. There will be no investment. There will be no tourism. Yes, we would like persons to come to our region. For instance, in Trinidad and Tobago, thank you for extending the e-visas to Trinidad and Tobago nationals, but Indian nationals do not require visas to travel to Trinidad and Tobago for a period of up to 90 days for both tourism and business purposes. But we're not getting the level of arrivals that we would like, even though the largest percentage of our population is of East Indian descent. You go to Trinidad and Tobago today, you feel very much at home because everyone looks quite like you. And we eat similar foods, we listen to similar music. Our cultural DNA is almost the same. So, as the technocrats, we really need to explore avenues with the business sector, the people side, to see how best we can harmonize our relationship. Because there's a lot of opportunity for Latin America and the Caribbean in India, and vice versa. There are lots of scope for growth, particularly in the area of trade and investment and joint partnerships. But signing the MOUs and the framework agreements have failed with respect to facilitating that growth. So our consultations need to be broader, to embrace persons outside of just the technical aspect of it in order to ensure that it moves on to the other areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. We entirely agree with your suggestion that for the moment, I think trade and investment is the overwhelming portion of our relationship, but it needs to be diversified, and in the long run, without greater, like you said, people-to-people interaction, it will not go further. So there is some facilitative measures that we have taken, but and thanks to the government of TNT, like you mentioned, there are other countries which have done much, but apart from that, we would urge others who are still thinking about it to take some action, so that at least for tourism, there is much to look out for. Distances are already intimidating, but if you have a set of facilitating measures, an easy visa, a better connectivity. Again, connectivity is a larger issue that we have to grapple with. For the moment, there is no direct flight to the region, but in spite of that, with a third country, there is the possibility of code sharing. We have been encouraging our carriers in the past to explore that, but I don't know whether it will happen immediately. But for the interim, at least a more, should I say, encouraging visa regime, both for tourism and for business, will help. Thank you. Anyone else? The Ambassador of Guyana, the floor is yours.
Let's get this mic again. Thank you. I spoke a bit about Guyana earlier, but I'll get back to that in a second. Firstly, like all my colleagues, and I doubt there'll be anyone who doesn't say this, I do welcome this seminar. The last one I think I attended was in 2016. It's good to see your country through someone else's eyes, even though within the scope of Latin America and the Caribbean tends to get a lot less eyes in it than, of course, the big trading partners and the big relationships in the more established countries. But it's good to hear, to hear this analysis, to hear the quality of analysis that's been available over these last few days about our countries and about our problems. So definitely do welcome it and look forward to a continuation of the series. That would be very good. I'd like to thank, obviously, both the ICWA and, of course, the MEA. Clearly, the ministry's also played a big part in this. I'd say a few words about about Guyana. I said earlier that our population has a big Indo-Guyanese component, about 4 to 3%. I did mention that the Afro-Guyanese component is about 37%, and the Amerindian component. Those are the original inhabitants who are in the kind of 10 to 12% region. So Guyana is what we used to call, and I think we are starting to call again, a plural society. Still not sure how that links in with being a multicultural society. I think there's a difference. But in our case, what the pluralism means and where we see it most, in a sense, unfortunately, is in our politics. So around election time, you notice the differences in the country. The rest of the time, and especially recently, the level of social integration is really quite amazing. It's still surprising how it pops back up again when there's politics. But it's, I think for those who are interested in our countries from the point of view of studying let's say the anthropology of it, it's interesting to my mind how in countries like the old indentured labor countries, there's still this idea of pluralism, and I often wonder exactly why it's different from the more modern concept of multiculturalism and how that all works. I want to say a bit about, I think Guyana has had very long-standing relations with India, as Trinidad, and other countries in CARICOM. One of the programs we spoke about a little early in the session before was your No India program, which has become increasingly popular in our part of the world. A point we made at the session then, which I'd like to repeat in this session, is that the No India program is still largely, well, almost entirely targeted at Gramitiya countries. So it's countries that have an Indian population from indentureship or whatever. And in terms of talking about ways to build links between the Latin America and Caribbean region overall and India, the suggestion that was made was that maybe India could look at extending that program to the Spanish-speaking countries and the other countries in our region. It's very popular with young people. They spend maybe a month here or more, and I suspect it will be a very good way of building up the numbers of exchanges that there are. And equally, I would have thought that we in our own, in Latin American and Caribbean region, maybe in our sub-regional groupings, could look at having a no CARICOM program or a no Pacific Alliance program so that it worked the other way. But when one talks about trying to build kind of relations between the countries, I'd have thought, the country and that region, that maybe looking at an extension of the No India program, that kind of concept would work quite well. The points you made about the lines of credit program are all too true. Guyana has a number of these programs. There's one that we consider fast is a program to do with mobile irrigation pumps, and that could be finished this year, which would make it about a 2-year program. On the other hand, a program we had to build a bypass road around Georgetown was signed in 2008. We have at least got the design stage, but it's crazy. There is a need for there to be better execution of these programs, but I can only repeat what Ambassador Chiburu from Argentina said. Getting through the bureaucracy in India, but also in our case in Guyana. You've got bureaucracy versus bureaucracy to get this thing done, and it is painful. I don't think there's any other word to describe it. I thought I should mention that Trinidad, Tobago, Guyana, and Suriname, the countries from our region that are represented here, are all members of CARICOM, which is the only true free trade zone within the Latin American and Caribbean region. I think it's something that hasn't yet come to its own in terms of economic empowerment in our region, but it's I think an institution that's been around now for maybe 40 years, and we are hoping that it will grow to become a more economic handle and entry point into our part of the world. Finally, I'll say that Guyana, though it is in South America, is a cricket playing country, and we play for the West Indies. So I'll end by Jai Windies, especially given that we're playing India at the moment and getting beat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I am in total agreement with all the points that you have raised, especially about grappling with bureaucracies on both sides. I understand that especially with respect to Guyana. There have been a project or two which have been more than 2 decades, and I can understand what it can mean to you and to us. But what I would like to reassure you is that a rethink on the guidelines for implementation of projects is underway, and we are trying to see if we can build a separate set of conditions which are applicable to Latin America, because there is the broader guideline for Government of India, but when we see the unique experience that we have vis-a-vis project implementation in Latin America, we feel the necessity of doing certain changes. So it is work in progress, but I think with your support and with your encouragement, we would like to reassess how we do projects in Latin America, what are the implementation problems, and how we can address this. This is very much on the table for us, and you would soon hear something positive on this. Thank you.
That's very good to know.
Thank you. We have Ambassador of El Salvador. I would give the floor to you, sir. Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I join the congratulations from my colleagues to ICWA for having this seminar. Also, congratulations to all the participants. I see a lot of young faces, the new generation that will be probably in the next years leading this thing. So it's very good to have this opportunity. I also agree with most of the things that my colleague have already told, so I won't be coming back on this. Maybe I will try to set up a couple of more things. I think it is true that Latin America is a region that cannot be seen as a whole. All of us are different, but also India is the same. And I think we need to have this included in the analysis. From our side, there is this stereotype of India being Delhi, and India is quite more than Delhi. Also for the embassies like ours, we are talking about 150 embassies here in Delhi. So there is this challenge for countries like mine, El Salvador, one of the smallest countries in the region, Latin America, but also in terms of what in this first seminar that yesterday was told about priorities. We are, in clarity, not a priority in terms of trade and that kind of things. So that's the real thing. So we need to go beyond that. And in my case, for example, I travel a lot in India, and I've seen a lot of opportunities for Indian companies, mostly in region cities like Chennai, Bangalore, Kolkata. So I think it is important to include this in the analysis of how to take to another level the relation between India and Latin America. It's not only that India should see the region in different as different countries and sub-regions, but also we need to see from our side that. And I request in that sense that MEA should also help on this, because so far when you go to one of these cities, you go by your own self, and luckily if you have some contacts there, you can do something. But I think this is one of the things we need to improve, how to, through LAC division, MEA, we can work also with the state and develop more strong ties between our countries and these states. Also, another thing that I agree is that we need to keep a more regular basis on our bilateral consultation. It is not good to have these gaps, even because as much as the world is changing in India and our countries. And 10 years ago, India was not the country that is now. So opportunities are different now than 10 years ago. And also for our countries, the needs and the possibilities are different. And I think that yesterday, for example, there were say that some issues like health, like technology, are good drivers for developing our stronger ties. But we need also to put those issues in these new times and needs. For example, I was discussing last time with Ambassador Patel about this idea on how to, for example, we face an issue as a country that is violence in my country. So yoga is a thing we haven't explored yet. So it is a good, big knowledge of India that could be also help for us in these matters we have now. So, I mean, these are kind of things we can look out. Tourism, for example, there is another possibility. I was recently talking with a businesswoman from here about how, wedding is something very important in India. So this is a growing sector in tourism. And a lot of people from India is looking around to new spots to get married. So that's a big market for our countries, because that's something new that could be unique in the life of Indian tourists. So these are the kind of thing we need to discuss, and for that, we need to keep a more regular and more often dialogues on this level of companies and that kind of things. So there are some also other issues that would be also discussed in this kind of meetings. For example, the thing you were telling about LOCs. For example, it is true we have a line offered since 2015, but each country is different. For example, for us, to take one LOC credit means to have a sovereignty, how do you say? Yeah, it's a debt. So, but I forgot the word now. But so it means that it needs to go through the parliament, and when you have a political situation in your country, that is not easy. So we need to find out another ways to help the companies to get access to those funding. So, for example, it should be interesting to see how India can give the money directly to the Indian companies and not go through the other country to have this kind of ¿cómo se dice? Deuda soberana, sovereign guarantee. So that's an issue we need also to discuss. But if we let 10 years, 5 years to not discuss this thing, it's not possible to address this kind of things. So other things that are important, and I think the panel of cultural was very, very, very enlightening in this. We need to go beyond in getting to know each other in this level, because in the economical side, there are good things, there are bad things, but there is a lot of ground, common ground that could be nurtured to have more understanding between the countries. And in that sense, scholarship are very important. And reciprocal stories is very important. So I think we also need to give more importance on that, not only from the Indian side, but from our countries, because we also need to do the same. So that's some ideas I wanted to share. In the next round, I will come back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think the recurrent theme of this panel has been that we should be ideally having regular institutional level dialogue between our regions. It in a way captures all the elements that we need to push, all the elements on the agenda, and I think these meetings at the functional levels, it's not only about high level visits which set the agenda, but it is the institutional level dialogues which actually push the agenda. So I think there is a big need on both sides to keep it periodic, regular, so that you are able to chase what you are aiming for, and things get delivered in due time. This is a recurring problem with the region, and I think I would solicit the help of all our distinguished ambassadors here, that we should be holding our meetings, especially at the the JCMs, the FOCs, which have been pending for years, which do not take place at a regular interval. It's very important that we hold them, and this will give a new vibrancy, a new momentum to our bilateral ties. Thank you, Ambassador. Are there any? Yes, please. Please introduce yourself.
Generally they come with the mic.
Okay.
Where is the seat? If you don't use it, I'll just go run and get it.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Devika. I am a PhD student from Latin American Studies in JNU. I've been a part of this session right from the beginning down to the very end, and I have a register full of notes. So this is a room filled with very powerful but well-intentioned people. So just in the spirit of asking for things and like giving recommendations, I would also like to request that for all of us in India who work on Latin America with great enthusiasm, despite being asked very often that, why are you working on Latin America? What is your interest in Latin America? And there are a lot of things that we could be studying for sure, but the region is very exciting and we have a great level of enthusiasm for it. As a PhD student, I would request you to also please look into research possibilities, availability of grants for us to visit your countries, for us to be able to engage with matter. And if you were able to do that, it would be worth coming to 1,000 of these events. And I would honestly thank the ICWA in my dissertation and in every piece of writing that I end up writing. So thank you so much. It's been wonderful listening to all of you. Thank you.
Yes, please. I think I have a mic here. I would like to draw your attention to the second part of the agenda, which is Latin American Studies and Latin American Caribbean Studies in India. I come from the Center for Latin American Studies, the only UGC-sponsored area studies program, and we've been there for almost 3 decades. We have a research program, an MPhil PhD program on Latin American studies. We regularly publish. We have visitors from Latin America. We have seminars, conferences, so we do the whole thing. So I thought I would tell you about that. And also, many times the Ministry of External Affairs and LAC Division has been very kind, and they've sponsored a lot of our events. However, I mean, I take her point there, and despite spending decades studying Latin American studies, we actually don't. There are only a handful of people in this room and in this country who actually study Latin America because of lack of opportunities. So when you have to convince somebody to study Latin America, the first thing is, why should we study? And therefore, then the whole issue of things that come together. So I thought that was one thing I could tell you. Secondly, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that in the morning also I mentioned that education is one area between India and Latin America which is very, very sadly, there are no linkages. And institutions are having linkages because they are the outcome of individual interest. So if I have interest, I have somebody I know, I have a linkage when I push my university to do that. However, there is no institution, there is no information available which we can do. And sporadically all over the places there are some technological institutions that have, and some like us. JNU has some. I think Jamia would also be probably having some. But so it's not, there is no structure to it. It's random completely. I think that's one place we need to look at it. Secondly, although there are 5 centers in ICCR in the region, but education is not one of the focus there, again. So we don't get ICCR students from the region at all. This year we were supposed to get one from Argentina, but something happened, and so even when I go to Argentina and talk about this ICCR scholarships, they are absolutely amazed. They don't know anything about it. So the visibility, the knowledge, I think that the idea, that is completely missing.
The fourth thing that I would like to bring is, we were talking about the fact that, we should meet more often. The ICWA had started a program called a consultative group on Latin America and the Caribbean, and which brought in the practitioners of foreign policy like you, and the ambassadors, and business people, and people who spend academics into that, and it was a very fruitful exchange. But unfortunately, it happened only once, and after that, it hasn't happened since 2012. I think that could be the first step one could start where. And to all the ambassadors, I would like to request you, since we spend a lot of our time, I have spent almost 30 years now studying Latin America. I think when we apply for visas, we should get some benefits out of it, because we have to submit so many papers, and so much of it is about getting notarized from our partner institutions. It creates a lot of hassles for them, and also for us to travel. So I think there should be something given to us by which, in appreciation of the work that we do. I think a lot of other countries do that, and I think the Latin American embassies also could extend that to us as well, to all the people who work on Latin American studies. Thank you.
Just to say in that point, El Salvador is free of visa exempted for Indian passport holders, so you are welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to make a very, very specific point. I know that, and it's about how we can actually implement this dream of many of our young students to be able to go. And I'm going to take up the specific case of Mexico, with whom we have a cultural exchange program, and through the MHRD, every year scholarships are announced. Now, with Mexico, there has been this thing going on from a very long time, and I see no reason why, for example, with big countries, we cannot have that built into our cultural exchange program. The CEPs are signed.
But let me add on that CEPs, wherever they have signed, have been I should say a force multiplier. But there have been many countries where CEPs has still not been signed, and that is a major, should I say, inhibiting factor. Yes. So that is what we are, the Cultural Exchange Program, Ambassador, which facilitates the movement of students, researchers, and whereas cultural agreements on cooperation in culture have been signed with most, if not all, but CEP, the Cultural Exchange Program, which facilitates the movement, what Madam is pointing out to, is still work in progress. So, and in fact, it is still not done with the bigger countries. So, where the inflow and outflow is much higher. So, this is something which we are pursuing very actively, and I hope that it is going to be expedited in the near future. Yes.
I just wanted to point out that we do get students from all over the world at the master's level. I'm talking about the School of International Studies at JNU. And we have got students from Mexico and from Brazil. But as of now, as per my knowledge, I don't think we have got any students from any other Latin American country for the master's program. So, and some of them do get funded by ICCR for the master's. So that's one. So maybe some Latin American countries can be perhaps, pushed a little, or some.
I can share with you on this that at least what I have seen in the recent past, our embassies have been proactive in this, in this effort. And a lot of this information about the various scholarships, if you visit the websites of our Indian missions in Latin America, you will find that all the information is already put up there. But what maybe one angle could be the language barrier. In many other, in many cases, at least what I have seen, that when we screen them, the English language is not up to the level where we can call them this side. So that is one aspect. But then there are many other issues as well. So it definitely needs encouragement. But and we will definitely look into it. I'll pass on the message.
Just one more point I'd like to make. This is about Indian studies in Latin America. I find that there are centers looking into East Asian studies, and that inevitably it's China or Japan. But India as a focus, I mean, a Center for Studies on India or an Indian Studies program, I really do not find in the Latin American countries. So if that... Yes, I know Argentina has...
State University of Rio de Janeiro has an Indian Studies program.
But Chile does not. I mean, there are chances.
But of course, it does not match up to what we can do.
Yeah, sure.
There should be much more. That is the point I was making, that visibility and the need to delve more deeper is severely limited on both sides. So this has to be pushed again by both governments.
No, just to highlight, Panama gave last year 3 scholarships for 3 students, I think from January. Okay, and this is one in one side, and the other side we offer for 5 diplomats from MEA, and sadly, MEA didn't nominate anybody. This is very sad because we privilege 5 places for India. From other countries, also China, we offer maybe 1 or 2, but for India we offer 5, and nobody joined. Nobody came.
I just want to make one point because I teach Diaspora in Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar, and that is a huge center, perhaps the largest in India, having 40 students carrying out their PhD in different issues of diaspora. What I expect from you is, if any students from diasporic countries, particularly in the Caribbean region, so if they can be called for, they do research on different issues of diaspora, or we can institute some kind of fellowship or through cultural exchange program or otherwise. So it will be very good to them to understand India and issue of diaspora as well.
I couldn't get what you are alluding to. Are you saying that scholarships will be offered from your side, or do you want it from Government of India side?
From Government of India, not from outside.
I mean, you want everything to be only from the government side? How about your own institute? No, if you have such a big center,
we are a central university, so that is whether we pay or Government of India.
What prevents you from offering places for our students from Latin America? I mean, is it difficult?
No, from Latin America, from Caribbean countries, anywhere. Yeah. So if we can pay students from those countries, if they can, anybody who's interested to do research on the research,
they are coming.
Particularly on diaspora issue, they can be.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
But I think UGC does not have any.
The existing offers are still unutilized. That is the real picture. There are many offers, be it for scholarships, that is ICCR, or even for training. Yeah, they have remained unutilized. So what is already on the table is still not 100%. So moving to a different. Yes.
Agricultural scholarship would not fit into diaspora, or civil scholarship, whatever. That doesn't fit into. So, particular issues which pertaining to a particular region, like Caribbean region, of course, become an important area.
That is the nodal point is ICCR for taking these issues on board.
But ICCR has set up a center for diaspora studies. It's a small center which it has set up under the aegis of ARSP, Antarashtriya Sahyog Parishad. So there is a center and there are some students there who are doing research. So yes, they're also doing some work there.
But I'm sure if you put this this proposal to ICCR, they can have a closer look at it, because if you see from the G2G side, they are the institution which does this. It's not exactly in our hand, but it's a good proposal. You can move it to ICCR for their.
But one of the things that that also came up in the
on education, like Madam pointed out, our engagement is absolutely zero, if I may say so. And the systems, the Indian system and the Latin American system have wide differences. So until you reach a point of finding a common ground, especially if you want to have a student going for a semester, and if it is not counted then back home when she's back, it really doesn't, it's not a good offer. No student is going to take it. And likewise in the Latin American countries. So until at the G2G level, you have actually a enabling framework or an MOU or an agreement on educational exchanges and exchanges of the kind that you are thinking of, it is not going to work, because the institutional framework is absent. It's not even, nobody has thought of that. And I think the second agenda item of LAC studies in India and Indian studies in LAC is a very pertinent one, because if you see institutional to institutional linkages, between research institutions, think tanks like ICWA, a few are there. They are in their niche, they are working. But if you see generally in LAC, it is something which is just not, should I say, been on our radar for a very long time.
So madam, is also another problem is when you are out of Delhi, you are not at all considered. Even you're not even in the sort of visibility side of the people in Delhi. So that is another problem. So because of that's why I'm saying there are many places where people singularly or in groups working on Latin America, but nobody knows of them because they are not visible. But because I am from the Area Studies program, which is from the UGC, so that makes it an important one.
Right.
But there are many people working around the country in small numbers, but there are the people working.
And that is why I would like to thank ICWA for having a national seminar and having scholars from around the country coming. We were not aware that in places like Gujarat or and other parts of the country, people coming from Imphal, talking about Latin America, it's a very reassuring thing for us. So this needs to be strengthened. It needs to be encouraged. And thank you. Please go ahead.
This is the last two.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, throughout the seminar, emphasis has been on trade and investment and nothing more. A tiny nation like Trinidad, a ma'am from there has spoken something so valuable that everybody have ignored, and I would like to repeat. She says, MOUs have not yielded the desired results, number one. And further she says, not having the level of engagement that will promote flow of people and trade. People, new element. Nobody have taken the people into account. And why I say people, I have lived with the people from that region over a decade. Around 14 years I have lived with them and worked with them from the West Indies and the Americas. My circumstances were such I had to work with them. My perceptions are different. I only want to talk about the young people from that part of the world. That part of the world, people from the West Indies, especially from the Indian diasporas, they are three kind of people: the Asians, Africans, and the Europeans, those who migrated to that region, right? The Indians are the only people, those who still consider the Ganges their mother and the India as their mother. And they always miss it. They always say, and they say, Bhaiya, tumne humko bula diya. This is what they say, brother, you have forgotten us. You don't recognize us. The NRIs and the PIOs, they're not at par. They don't recognize each other. They don't think they are the Indians. They're something sub. The Indians in the England in the Americans, they don't interact. The Indians in the West Indies and the Americas, they don't interact. So this is the dilemma over there. This is about these people. What other youth, I mean the from the Europe and the African, I had a great interaction with them. They say, Why have we been kept in isolation? We can pull on very well. We've been very good friends. We've been doing a lot of things. But there's no interaction amongst the youth. There's frustration. Only the privileged youth, as you have been talking, that we are doing this, we're giving scholarship, or this and that, they will avail it. What about the people at the grassroots? They are isolated, they are left over. Nothing for them. My experience for 14 years, they are isolated, totally isolated, and lamenting. The young people are left out. People are left out. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about the visibility of Latin American. I think there are so many scholars and diplomats. Why not to ask them to write a papers or article in different newspaper, or why not put them on a news channel, and they can be guidelines may be issued that every news channel should spend some time on Latin American countries so that they can exchange information, and ambassador and diplomats and other scholars can be available on them, and they can give a lot of information on them. Thank you.
I want to start from ma'am what you said about the student exchange program, where I am coming from Manipal. This is the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, where we have an experience of exchange programs like one semester programs, which students come from US and other places. They come for one semester, they will take, and credit they can carry and go back. And there are some programs like summer courses and all, maybe 1 month they can visit and be with Indians and interact with the places across the country and go back. So these are the possibilities which will be work as a soft power engagement with a larger section. So we can search for that area, and I think our university will be capable to handle it. Sure. Thank you.
To that, even we have a Study India program with Nihon University, Japan, where the course is completely made for the students coming from there. And also we have one right now with the Sciences Po Lyon, where we have 2 students who have gone from here, from Goa University, and they are there, and 2 students from there have come for a year. And these credits will be transferred back to them and when in their home institution. So there are but then again they're individually one to one kind of thing. There's no institutional mechanism for that.
I just want to share with the colleagues who are from the universities here that the government has introduced at least 2 schemes. One, the GYAN, which was there earlier. We have invited Professor Gladys Lakini from Argentina. She was here with us, from the University of Rosario. And so that's one program, that scheme which is there, which I'm just saying that these are schemes which are available. Similarly, there's another scheme which the Government of India has now introduced, and that is I think it's called the STRIDE, where you also have the possibility of student exchange. I just wanted to put...
Well, that was a very fruitful session, and from ICWA, I'm really glad that we could give you this opportunity to interact with each other. And I'm thankful to Yojana for taking out her valuable time and giving us, sharing her thoughts with us in a very candid and frank way, I must say. And she has touched upon all the various sectors and all the areas of our relationship with the Latin American countries. And I must say that we at the Council consider it very important to have a focus in the Council's activities on Latin America. We've always had a research scholar or research scholars dealing with Latin American countries. We are very regular with taking out issue briefs, viewpoints on issues pertaining to the Latin American countries, and they are well received. And I must say, as Yojana also pointed out, this is a new effort that ICWA has embarked upon of focusing on bringing together and really using its convening power to bring together scholars in one particular field from within the country to Delhi and hosting them for deliberations and seminars, exchange of views. And this time we thought we should also have sessions with our representatives of our of the missions, concerned missions in Delhi. So this is one, we've done a similar program on Myanmar. We did one on the EU, and we are going to have in another couple of weeks, we are doing a 1.5 day seminar on Sri Lanka, and Africa is happening, and the Vice President is going to come for that. Again, there the effort is to bring together national scholars and bring them together to know each other, and so that we also come to know who's studying what, where, how many UGC centers in a particular area, so that really is the focus. So I want to, my special thanks to all the heads of missions who are present here for your valuable time, for being here with us, for sharing your views, and again in a very candid way, in a very relaxed fashion. We've enjoyed your presence here. Thank you so much. And I will just give to Stuti to say the words of thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am. On behalf of the Indian Council of World Affairs, it gives me a lot of pleasure to thank you all, our distinguished chairs, panelists, and visiting scholars who have come from across the country to deliberate on the matters today. I take this opportunity to also thank DG ICWA Dr. TCA Raghavan, DDG Shri Somen Bagchi, JS Ms. Nutan Kapoor Mahavar, and JS Yojana Patel, and the Director of Research, Dr. Niveta Tare, for their constant support. I would take this opportunity to thank the seminar staff, administrative staff of ICWA for the help that they have extended to me for the seminar. And of course, I could not have done this without the support of my colleagues who have constantly helped me out. And lastly, I would like to thank all of you, our audience, for your valuable time and for your points during the deliberation. I invite you all to join us for tea in the foyer. Thank you so much.